Welcome everybody to the Thursday, August 19th formal meeting of the Iowa City Planning and Zoning Commission. We're working off our agenda, so that was the call to order. The second thing we'll do is roll call, so we'll just start up with Mr. Sines.
Mark Sines.
Billy Townsend.
Maria Padron.
Mike Hench.
Susan Craig.
Okay, so we have a quorum. Members Phoebe Martin and Mark Nolte have excused absences for tonight. The next item on the agenda is public discussion of any item not on the agenda. There's a member of the public who would like to address the Iowa City Planning and Zoning Commission on any agenda, any item that's not listed on the agenda tonight. Now is your opportunity. So if you'd have something you'd like to say, please come up to the podium. Second call for public comment on any item not on the agenda. Not seeing anybody moving forward, we'll go ahead and move on. So to our comprehensive plan and zoning code amendment items. Next item up is item number 4, case number CPA 21-0002. The location is southwest corner of Slothhour Road and IWV Road. This is a request to set a public hearing for September 2, 2021 on a proposed amendment to the Southwest District Plan to change the land use designation on the future land use map from single family / duplex residential, vegetative noise / site buffer, and future urban development to intensive commercial for approximately 79 acres. Sarah, is this your item?
Ann Russett with Neighborhood and Development Services, she, her. We do not have a presentation for the commission tonight. We are just asking the commission to set a public hearing for September 2nd.
All right. Is there a motion by a member of the commission to set a public hearing of the Iowa City Planning and Zoning Commission for September 2, 2021 on CPA 21-0002? And what would be the location of that meeting? Would it be here in this room?
I believe it will be in this room.
Okay,
yeah.
in this room. Is there a motion for that?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Sines. Second by Townsend. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving this motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, the motion passes unanimously. Next item up, case number CPA 21-0001, public hearing on a proposed amendment to the South District Plan to facilitate development that follows form-based principles. Ann?
Thank you, Chair. This item and the next item will be presented separately, but they are both part of the same project. The first is the comprehensive plan amendment that we are proposing. I'm going to give a little bit of background on this item and then turn it over to Kirk Lehman, who's going to provide some more information on the plan amendment itself. And the South District Plan was adopted in 2015, and that area of the city includes a lot of land that is undeveloped. In that plan, it was recommended that a form-based code for the area be considered to manage new development, ensure a mix of housing at compatible scales, and encourage compact and connected neighborhoods. Since January of 2019, the city has worked with Opticos Design to develop a form-based code, and as part of that process, staff has determined that amendments to the South District Plan are necessary prior to considering adoption of the code. As I mentioned, the South District Plan was adopted in 2015. After it was adopted, the city worked with Opticos Design in 2017 to assess the feasibility of implementing a form-based code. Several stakeholder interviews were conducted. There was a community workshop and a visual preference exercise. And after that work in 2019, we continued our work with Opticos Design to implement the vision of the South District Plan and the work that was done in 2017. In 2019, we worked with a consulting firm that prepared a residential market analysis as part of this project and worked on drafting the code. And we prepared options for a land use map, which Kirk will go into in more detail shortly. In November of 2019, we released the initial draft of the code for public comment. And a few months later, in February of 2020, we released the draft future land use map for public comment. Last year, we conducted additional outreach and worked on code revisions and map revisions based on feedback received. And in June of 2021, we released a revised draft code and a revised draft plan. This table here gives a summary of the outreach that we've done since the beginning of this process in 2019. I wanted to specifically mention the work that we did with the Iowa City Community School District. Staff did meet with the school district to discuss the plan and the policy direction proposed. When we met with the school district, they informed staff that based on the planning area that we were looking at, they did not need any additional land to address their school needs, at least not within this 900-acre area that we are looking at. We also coordinated with affordable housing developers and affordable housing advocates and met with the Johnson County Livable Communities Housing Action Plan. And based on that outreach, they had recommended some revisions to the initial draft that we released in 2019. Their main concerns were related to housing affordability and housing accessibility. So based on those comments, we integrated regulatory incentives for affordable housing into the draft code that the commission will be reviewing tonight. We also incorporated changes to the frontage type standards to address concerns related to accessibility, to make sure that there were options for developers to develop at-grade entries at the front of buildings. We also received some input on the future land use map. We changed proposed designations based on concerns related to single-loaded streets, where we proposed increased density along single-loaded streets to offset the costs of building a street but only having housing on one side of those streets, and also along major corridors such as McAllister Boulevard. We also received input that a property owner wanted us to downgrade an area along the golf course, which we accommodated. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kirk.
Thanks, Han. So for the proposed comprehensive plan amendment, as Ann had mentioned, it's running simultaneously with the zoning code amendment that's happening. Really, the changes to the code are mostly relatively minor. So there's some new context that's added. There's some new goals and objectives added. A lot of those things are trying to make more explicit the connection between form-based codes, and then especially that context is really trying to look at other goals that the city has regarding equity and sustainability, and also provide context as to what form-based planning looks like within the community. The bigger change is to the future land use map. So in that case, we added a new future land use map. There's a new thoroughfare map as well. But really it's to accommodate missing middle housing types and more opportunities for neighborhood commercial than are currently there. So it's a lot of switching the designations from one that is use-based to one that is form-based, and I'll talk about each of those changes more in a little bit. So first are kind of those contextual changes. You'll notice, especially at the beginning, there's new background information. There's stuff about the input for the form-based code. There's context regarding Native peoples that were not mentioned within the first drafts of the plan, implications of past planning practices, and then some discussion of equity and sustainability initiatives within the city. It also updates information that is out of date. For example, development that's happened since 2015, some changes in names, minor changes like that. And there's some generalized language as well in the housing, transportation, and commercial areas. And if you look throughout, all of those changes are redlined in that draft plan that was included in your agenda packet for tonight. The other kind of contextual change is there's a new chapter regarding form-based codes that's added in form-based planning. So it discusses what they are and clarifies how they might be implemented within the South District. As far as changes to goals and objectives, like I said, a lot of them are trying to explicitly link broader comprehensive plan goals to form-based planning as it relates to the South District. So especially goals related to housing diversity, walkable neighborhoods, and neighborhood commercial nodes. You'll also find those redlined within your packet, but here they are. So one for housing is a new goal to provide a diversity of housing in the South District, including a range of housing types, densities, and price points to help improve equity and sustainability, with the objective to adopt a form-based code for the South District that encourages a diversity of housing types, densities, and price points. For streets, trails, and sidewalks, the new objective is to adopt a form-based code that promotes walkable neighborhoods and encourages the use of alternative modes of transportation and reduces car dependence. And then the new objective for commercial areas is to adopt a form-based code that provides for a compatible mix of non-residential uses, including commercial nodes that serve the needs of the neighborhood. So the goals, like I said, are just trying to explicitly link some of those goals. There were other conversations throughout the plan about adopting a form-based code, but this is just tying it to the broader goals that are available throughout the plan. And then as far as form-based planning goes, I just wanted to touch briefly upon that as well. So with the comprehensive plan, the primary way that the city implements its comprehensive plans and district plans is through the zoning code. So the zoning code provides rules on how land can be used, how it can be developed, regulates what structures can be built and where. And the form-based zoning or form-based planning represents somewhat of a paradigm shift for the city. So instead of organizing zones around use categories such as residential or commercial, you're really looking at the intended physical form and character of the space. So for example, instead of commercial, you might say Main Street, or instead of residential, you might say some sort of neighborhood that you're looking to have there. It doesn't mean that use isn't regulated. It is included in form-based planning, but it's regulated secondarily, and it is tied to the maximizing compatibility between those uses and that physical form then. As far as form-based planning then, it also looks beyond individual buildings to create vibrant walkable urbanism. So it looks at the full space, which includes things like frontage types, which is the interaction between the street and the private realm. It includes civic spaces, thoroughfares, and building types as well. And so this is a change from previous conventional zoning standards and from some of our future land use categories that we've had in the past. It doesn't regulate by density like it has in the past, but rather it focuses more on that intended character of the area. And as a result, it also does not delineate between, for example, single family and multifamily uses. So this was the future land use map that was in the 2015 South District Plan. So the change that you'll see to this map that's been proposed by staff is to have an area of it, basically the undeveloped area, be regulated under form-based future land use districts rather than use-based future land use districts. So it includes a series of new maps after this as well that proposes where different form-based districts might be. And the existing areas don't get painted under these new land use categories. They would retain their existing land use categories. So again, this really is only applying to that undeveloped portion of the South District. So as far as what the future land use map looks like then, you've seen this before. You know, we've been talking about this over the last couple meetings. It's a lot more detailed than our current future land use map that we have. And that is to provide some certainty as to what uses go where and how things might look based on new form-based standards that might be implemented following adoption of something like this. You can see the boundaries of the area are roughly South Gilbert Street on the west. You have Soccer Park Road kind of going through the middle of that south portion, and McAllister goes through the center of this area. As far as the street network, this is still a comprehensive plan, so the street network is not a subdivided area where this is going to be exactly what it looks like, but based on the proposed standards that staff has proposed for form-based zoning in the area, you know, these are approximately the block sizes that you'd be looking at. There are rules about connectivity. There are rules about what uses get located where, and so this is one example of what that future land use might look like. It doesn't incorporate all stormwater management areas either, so it could change over time. So as far as the new future land use categories then, They're based on the rural to urban transect. So that is a set of typologies where T1 is the most natural or open space, all the way up to T6, which would be urban core, such as downtown Iowa City. And then in the middle, you have rural, suburban, general urban, urban center. A lot of this is especially looking to incorporate missing middle housing types within the city. So missing middle housing is house scale multifamily. It used to be very common in cities, but a lot of current zoning codes don't allow it and instead focus on low density, single family detached, and they focus on high density multifamily with very little in between. So again, being a form-based approach, this is a slightly different way of looking at those uses. In the South District, the two transects that would be used would be T3 suburban and then T4 general urban, because you are at the edge of the city, so it would have a mix of both of those housing typologies or neighborhood typologies. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there that the T3 is generally less dense, and again, as you get up into T4, you have denser development, more block scale buildings, less house scale buildings, et cetera. In terms of what the individual land use categories look like then, on the suburban side, that T3 side, you have the neighborhood edge, which is detached single-family duplexes and cottage courts. And then on the neighborhood general side, on the right there, you move up a little bit, so you're looking at the same uses as T3, but you're also including some townhomes, runs of 2 to 3, and then some small multifamily uses as well. Again, those are house scale multifamily uses. On the T4 side, it gets a little more denser. The form becomes closer. So neighborhood small on the bottom left, it includes building types such as cottage courts, townhomes, small multifamily uses, and small courtyard buildings. In the central picture down there is neighborhood medium, so that's where you start to get into larger multifamily buildings. Still predominantly house scale, but you do have the opportunity for some block scale buildings there. And then as you get into the main street, which is the bottom right, that is a relatively finite area of the South District, or is proposed to be a relatively finite area. So that's where you have what you would think of your typical small town main street with larger multifamily above and storefronts down below. So as far as that's laid out on the future land use map then, again, here's that map. As you're looking at T3 zones, the way that Opticos, as it was developing this, laid them out, is the T3 neighborhood edge. You're looking at the edge of existing developments for the most part. Again, that's that smaller, less dense land use category. The T3 neighborhood general tends to be in interior neighborhoods. So that is quite a bit of that interior space. And the T3 neighborhood edge is that light pink that you'll see, and the T3 neighborhood general is kind of that baby blue. I also apologize if I misrepresent the colors because I am colorblind, so.
I don't see any blue up there.
Well, the lighter color that is not pink. So I wanted to say that now in case I was mischaracterizing it. As you're looking at the T4 zones then, the way that these were laid out were T4 neighborhoods small is generally around collector streets. They're around neighborhood nodes that are proposed, things such as parks, main street areas, major intersections. As you get into that T4 neighborhood medium then, you're looking at arterial streets and single loaded streets, areas that are more appropriate for higher density uses. And then the T4 main street area is reserved for the intersection of Sycamore and McAllister, and so that's that darkest color just west of that intersection. There's also a future land use map that looks at thoroughfares. So that demonstrates the proposed hierarchy of streets. Again, it's not the exact layout that would happen. That would depend on subdivision and on developers as they come in. But it does provide that concept about what a potential map might look like based on the new standards that are incorporated in the code. So tonight, the commission is looking at the comprehensive plan amendment. And there are two approval criteria that are in the code at 14.8D, 3D that look at what you should consider as you're thinking about adopting comprehensive plan amendments. So the first criteria is that circumstances have changed and or additional information or factors have come to light such that the amendment is in the public interest. And that second criteria is that the proposed amendment will be compatible with other policies or provisions of the comprehensive plan, including any district plans or amendments thereto. So as far as circumstances and how they've changed over time, since 2015, the South District has continued to see residential development. Alexander Elementary was developed in 2016, and McAllister Boulevard was recently extended as well over to Sycamore Street. Again, like Ann had said earlier, about half of the undeveloped land in the South District is within city limits, about half is outside. But there are many different land uses that are currently there. So there's agricultural in a lot of that undeveloped area. There's single family and multifamily residential uses. There's some civic uses and some open space uses as well. As you get further north, there's also some commercial uses, but not within the study area that we're looking at tonight. Generally, development has aligned with that 2015 plan. But since that time, there's been extensive work made towards the plan objective that the city should consider a form-based code to help ensure that a true mix of housing at a compatible scale can be achieved. So as Ann had mentioned, there's that 2017 feasibility study, which looked at form-based zoning in the South District and noted the need to build on the South District plan. Generally, the current future land use scenario aligns with our current conventional zoning standards, so it doesn't really align with form-based standards. And that really came to light as we were working on this form-based code amendment. Because it distinguishes between single-family, mixed, and multifamily residential uses, provides limited opportunities for neighborhood commercial areas, and more importantly, it does regulate its future land use categories by use rather than by form. So work towards these standards have revealed a need for the revised future land use map, which staff believes constitutes a change in circumstances and makes this amendment in the public interest. However, there have been other changing circumstances as well, and those have been especially, looking at goals related to social justice and equity, which are often tied to things like housing diversity and housing affordability. In 2020, the City Council adopted Resolution 20-159 to enhance social justice and racial equity, which also looked at housing use or housing diversity. And conventional zoning regulations have also been used in the past in other areas to support racial and class segregation. So explicitly racial zoning was allowed prior to 1917. Once that was done, some cities turned to other exclusionary practices, such as single-family only zoning, large minimum lot sizes. You'll often hear about exclusionary zoning in reference to those things. That worked with other policies, such as redlining, slum demolition. All of those things actively worked against promoting equity. So even in Iowa City, we had racially restricted covenants until that was made illegal in the 60s. And right now in Iowa City, about 81% of residential land is zoned single-family development, and about half of that is zoned for low-density development. So form-based planning helps address this by trying to increase housing choice, by allowing a mix of housing uses, which allows a range of price points. And it doesn't solve the issue, but it does mitigate one barrier to providing affordable housing options and diverse housing choices. So I did want to mention, if you haven't seen the mapping segregation in Iowa, I'd encourage you to look. It shows where there were racially restricted covenants in Iowa City. Obviously, a lot of these were in place prior to the development of the South District, but these sorts of policies have shaped zoning and housing policy in the U.S. And then other changing circumstances, the city adopted its 2018 Climate Action Adaptation Plan in the past, and that includes goals to reduce carbon emissions by 45% by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. As you're looking at conventional low-density zoning, it contributes to higher greenhouse gas emissions because when things are spread out, it's difficult to navigate by anything other than a car, which reinforces an auto-oriented pattern of development. As more people have cars, that increases traffic congestion, especially near major employment centers. And higher parking minimums also do assume car ownership. They can increase the prices of housing. So form-based planning helps address this again by helping to improve the city's building and transportation systems, by seeking to develop compact neighborhoods, trying to allow the opportunity to be traversed easily by foot, bike, and bus, in addition to cars. So these changing circumstances, staff believes, does constitute something that is in the public interest to address in the South District plan. As far as consistency or compatibility with the policies and provisions of the comprehensive plan and other plans, generally, the proposed changes align with existing goals and objectives that are in the South District Plan and in the comprehensive plan as well. So the comprehensive plan shows this area as primarily residential land uses, mostly 2 to 8 dwelling units per acre, with some areas that are 8 to 16 dwelling units per acre. It shows some commercial uses. With the future land use maps, though, we do defer generally to the district plans, which are more specific. So that shows future land use categories based on use. So you have low and medium density single-family residential, low medium density mixed residential, multifamily, and mixed use commercial. That somewhat contrasts with the text of the plan that says to incorporate a true mix of housing at a compatible scale, and that includes those missing middle housing types, which are also discussed in the current plan. So what the amendment does is refine those future land use categories to better reflect the range of housing types discussed in. And if you've looked at the future land use map, this is what the South District looks like in the comprehensive plan adopted in 2013. This is what it looks like in the 2015 South District plan. So again, you can see that it follows some similar principles to the way that the new future land use categories were mapped out. It has denser housing along major corridors or clustered at neighborhood nodes. It does include multifamily at the corners of South Gilbert and McAllister, South Gilbert and Lehman, and some other areas as well. And it does include some neighborhood commercial at the heart of the district at the intersection of Sycamore and McAllister. It designates it as mixed use, but neighborhood commercial in intent partially. So the new future land use map then again makes the undeveloped areas subject to form-based standards, which looks like this. And so again, it was developed following some similar principles to the development of the prior future land use map, but it does better align with the text of the code regarding future land uses and form-based planning. As far as other goals from the comprehensive plan, there are many that are incorporated throughout it, including ensuring a mix of housing types within each neighborhood, encouraging pedestrian-oriented development, planning for commercial and defined commercial nodes, supporting preservation of open space, farmland, and then visibility from parks, and discouraging parks that are surrounded by private property as well. And as far as the South District plan, there are several goals that it also aligns with, things like preserving environmentally sensitive features, considering opportunities for small neighborhood commercial and mixed use at key intersections, and then providing safe and logical walking routes to school with well-connected streets. And then with the new goals and objectives that are proposed to be added to the plan, again, they do support the plan. Obviously, they're proposed as part of it. So they clarify how those form-based standards implement the plan's intent as it relates to housing, transportation, and commercial areas. And it aligns with other more recent policy efforts of the city, including the city's strategic plan, the climate action adaptation plan, and then the Black Lives Matter and systemic racism resolution that I had mentioned. So incorporating these elements into the plan helps ensure consistency across all of the city's policy documents. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ann.
Okay, I would like to discuss some of the more recent feedback that we've received on the plan, and I'd like to start with a question that we received from a commission member this week. And the question was, based on the land that is currently in unincorporated Johnson County and not part of the city, what happens if they do not want to annex and if they want to develop within the county? And the land that's in the county is currently within our growth boundary, and it is subject to the policies in the city-county fringe area agreement. So any development that happens in the county would be subject to those policies. We are currently working on updating our fringe area agreement, and I hope to get that update to the commission very soon. But in the fringe area agreement, since this area is in our growth boundary, it would be subject to the city's urban design standards, which is essentially the city's subdivision standards, which talks about consistency with the city's comprehensive plan and also ensures compliance with our block standards that are currently in our subdivision code. Some of the other public comments that we received that were included in your agenda packet, I just wanted to go over those briefly. We received a letter from the Sandhill Estates Homeowners Association. They're concerned about a lack of transition between the existing neighborhood along McAllister Court and new development. They have requested that that area be changed from a T4 designation to T3. They also have expressed concerns on impacts to education and emergency services. Representatives of the South District Neighbor Association expressed an interest in having more indoor recreation space in this area. And then we also heard from 2 property owners that requested to remove their property from the planning area. Late correspondence was also received after the packet was published, which I've provided to you tonight. Richard Stapleton mentioned that he was unaware of the plans to develop the area and also echoed the concerns from the Sandhill Estates Homeowners Association. Bill Neal was concerned with the slight reduction proposed in parking, and Glenn Lynn also had concerns with the multifamily proposed behind McAllister Court. Just to provide a little bit more context, this is the area that we're talking about here when I mentioned behind McAllister Court. McAllister Court is that street just to the east of the area that's circled in red. And that area that is circled in red was the area where I was requested that that be changed from a T4 designation to a T3 designation. There were 2 ways that staff addressed transitions from existing neighborhoods with this future land use map. The first is by designating adjacent land a T3 neighborhood edge, which is that light pink that you see here. The second way was designating adjacent land as open space, and that is the approach that we took in this area. The land behind these homes along McAllister Court is designated open space, and then with the proposed future right-of-way of about 770 feet, and then the T4 is identified there. This is not that different than what is in the current land use policy map. If you can see, the area just to the west of McAllister Court is designated as low, medium density mixed residential, which would allow duplexes, townhomes, and smaller scale multifamily. What staff is proposing is the T4 neighborhood small, which would allow these building types: a cottage court, multiplex small, townhomes, and courtyard buildings small. These are building types that are more than 1 unit. It's not single family. These are, however, house scale buildings. These are the 2 areas that property owners requested being removed from the plan: the area south of Lehman and then the area east of the Sycamore Greenway. Staff does not recommend removing these areas from the plan. And that concludes our presentation. Staff is recommending that the commission recommend approval of CPA 21-0003, and a proposed amendment to the South District Plan to facilitate development that follows form-based principles. In terms of next steps, after a recommendation from the commission, we will ask that the City Council set a public hearing to discuss the comprehensive plan amendment and the proposed form-based standards, which will run concurrently at council. So I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the commission that have questions of staff regarding this item? I have one I'll just start off with. Hey, Kirk, could you just illustrate to me for the T3 transect, what would the buildings look like and the building options available to people in a T3?
Sure.
You want to pull something up?
And I would ask the T4, but Ann just pretty much answered that in the slide, so.
So I'm going to pull out of this for a second. We have this in more detail in the later sections. So as you're looking at T3 land uses, depends on the T3 zone. There's T3 neighborhood edge and then T3 neighborhood general. T3 neighborhood edge would allow a house large, shown in the upper left corner, would allow a duplex side-by-side in the upper right corner, and the cottage court, shown in the upper left corner. In the T3 neighborhood general, that would allow a house small, shown in the bottom left corner, either of the duplexes shown on the right side of the screen, a cottage court again, or townhomes in rows of 2 or 3 in the bottom left corner, and then a multiplex small, which could be up to 6 dwelling units in the upper right corner.
In the current zoning that's in the South District, how are those types of structures that are currently listed in the T3 not encouraged in the current zoning? So why has the missing middle not occurred in the South District?
Andy, you want to take that?
Sure. We have the current zoning in the South District, there's some RS5, and then there's also some interim development zones, but the RS5 and RS8 are single-family zones. The residential uses that would be allowed in that zone are detached single-family and duplexes on corner lots. Our current zoning code does not contemplate things like cottage court or some of the small multifamily that Kirk has talked about. It would allow some attached single-family, but again, only on corner lots. So the proposed code envisions multiple housing types that really aren't even contemplated through our current zoning unless you were to do a planned development overlay.
So without this form-based code implementation in these undeveloped areas, then the existing code would pretty much mean that the push for the missing middle housing option as an effort to increase affordability and access to housing probably could not occur in the South District.
Not without planned development overlay rezoning, yes.
And then another question, because I noticed some people are concerned about emergency services, was not, and I don't know if the land was sold or if there's a purchase option or it's just discussion, but isn't there plans for a fire station at the corner of Cherry and South Gilbert?
There are plans. The city owns that land, and they are eventually, the plan is to build a fire station. It's currently not budgeted, but that is the plan. And speaking with the fire chief, once that is there is not going to be a need for additional land or another fire station in the proposed planning area.
Okay. And then on the Fringe area agreement, could you just illustrate, because that's a concept I'm sure is new to almost everybody in the audience, how that controls zoning in the city's planned growth area south of the current city limits going into 2 miles into the unincorporated county area?
Yeah, so the Fringe Area Agreement is an agreement between the city and Johnson County, and as the chair mentioned, it applies to land within 2 miles of our corporate limits. A portion of that land is within the city's growth boundary, and that the growth boundary is the area of the city that we anticipate to be annexed into the city eventually and developed to city standards. And so the portion of the land that's currently in the county in our planning area is all within the growth boundary. Did you want me to elaborate on anything else there?
No, I just think that needed some additional elaboration because the whole concept of Fringe area agreement is just something most people are not conversant on.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions by members of the commission for staff?
I have a comment and something I'd like you to share with the people who are here today. I thought it was very interesting in one of our meetings where you reviewed how wide the streets were and the variability of that throughout this proposed area. And could you just briefly repeat that and, for the people who are here?
Sure. The majority of the area, and Kirk, if you want to bring up the thoroughfare map, the majority of the area where you see streets proposed on this map that Kirk is going to share, the kind of the orangish yellow, those are considered neighborhood streets. The proposed right-of-way is 70 feet. The width of the pavement of the street would either be 26 feet or 28 feet, which is actually our current standard. We're not proposing to change that. There are other streets that are a little bit wider, where we're envisioning bike lanes, wider sidewalks, and all of these areas we're also incorporating street trees, and landscaping is going to be part of that. So the thoroughfare standards not only address the width of the street, but street trees and kind of that strip between the sidewalk and the pavement of the street.
And I also had a question about, at some point, there was a comment made about alcohol retail sales and that it should be a special exception, which I think I agree with. But I just want to make sure that by that we don't mean, I mean, there could be a small restaurant here or a small grocery store that, you know, sells beer or whatever, right?
Right, yeah. So we did receive a comment. The concern was liquor stores, which is considered an alcohol-related retail use in our zoning code, which is separate from restaurants. If a restaurant does want to serve alcohol, that will need a liquor license, which is a separate process. Grocery stores can also serve or sell alcohol if it gets to be more than a certain percentage of their sales. That's when it turns into a liquor store. So staff is actually proposing a change to how those are permitted, and we are recommending it be changed to a special exception.
Speaking of neighborhood commercial, in the current zoning in the South District, is there any possibility of neighborhood commercial, or is, that's?
It's very limited. There's one area shown for neighborhood commercial, and it's at the southwest corner of McAllister and Sycamore, basically right at the center of that map. The map that we are proposing shows, I think, 7 nodes for kind of community centers. The majority of those are commercial nodes, and some of those are also open space nodes.
Could you illustrate in the neighborhood commercial in the form-based code what type of commercial businesses could be in those areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I might need to reference the draft for that. They're limited to 1,500 square feet, I believe, in size. We are proposing that whatever non-residential uses are allowed in those areas, they have operating hours between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., I believe is what we're proposing. Some of the uses, I believe, are restaurants. Kirk, can you maybe bring up that?
Well, I was going to bring up this just to point out where those neighborhood nodes are. They are shown on the future land use map. It's a little different. And I can pull out my code and look at it too. So in the zoning code, they would be considered open zones for those neighborhood nodes. Uses that would be allowed within open zones that wouldn't be allowed in other zones would include things such as offices, retail uses, specifically sales and personal service would be permitted by right for the most part. That would also include in the Main Street district. As you're looking at some denser uses, so if you have a neighborhood open zone that's in a neighborhood small zone, that's where you would allow potentially alcohol sales oriented retail. And so staff did recommend, and I believe that your packet reflects, that is a special exception. There are also special exceptions related to general animal related commercial uses, so that'd be things like veterinarians. And open zones are of similar permissiveness as it comes to educational facilities and those types of uses. So it's mostly related to those neighborhood commercial uses.
Thank you. Any questions for staff by members of the commission?
Remind me, the overall size is 900 plus acres that this covers, is that correct?
That's correct.
Any further questions? Hearing none, now is the opportunity. This will be opening the public hearing. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding this application, CPA 21-0001. First off, I'd like to welcome you all here. I really appreciate people taking the time and the effort to come here to share your opinions. This is how democracy works, and I presume most of you live in the South District, as I have since 1993. And I don't know many of you, but welcome. The rules for public hearings is we limit the comments to 5 minutes. So it gives everybody the opportunity to speak for 5 minutes. Then once everybody has spoken once, then you can come back and speak again for 5 minutes. We'd ask people not to really repeat comments they've said before. We've been doing this for a long time. But it's perfectly fine for you to get up there and say, I support the comment that Celeste Vincent just said. That's perfectly fine to do that. And just so everybody has an opportunity to speak, I will be timing you. So at 5 minutes, I'll ask you to wrap it up. And whoever would like to speak, please come up, state your name, and if you have an unusual name, please spell it for the minute taker, and let us know your address so we know where you live. All right. Who would ever like to speak? There's the podium.
I'm Robert Domsick, and I live at 860 McAllister Court. I'm just going to sign in here. Would somebody please bring up the future land use map, please?
Do you think you can leave it on so I can run?
Okay, thank you.
Leave the lights on.
Are you okay seeing this
yeah.
as is? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
got a
okay, good.
Not much
I
difference.
can see what I'm going to talk about. Okay, cool, thank you. All right, so I'm Robert Domsick, and how many people here are from the Sandhill Estates area tonight? Okay, so we've got quite a showing here tonight. I'm Robert Domsick. I'm one of the directors of the Sandhill Estates Homeowners Association, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the residents of the Sandhill Estates neighborhood. We're a neighborhood of 126 homes adjacent to the proposed South District plan located north of McAllister Boulevard, running from McAllister Court up here, down east towards Langenberg Avenue, up in this particular area up towards Wagon Wheel Drive and over, so, or in Keel Boot Loop, so right about here. All right. Members of our community have been present and engaged during the recent presentations of the city's South District plan. These presentations generated a large amount of discussion and concern within our community. Our board of directors compiled the 5 most common concerns from our homeowners. We took this list and visited homes within our neighborhood, asking homeowners to sign if they agreed with the concerns the board had compiled. On July 29, 2021, we submitted a document to the city discussing the 5 areas of concern. The document was included in the August 5th packet and today's and contains homeowner signatures from 64 homes within our neighborhood. Those homes that did not sign our document either were not home when our volunteers stopped by, or our volunteers were unable to survey the portions of the neighborhood due to time constraints. In other words, 100% of the homeowners in our neighborhood who spoke with our volunteers signed the letter of concern. If you have not reviewed the letter of concerns in detail, or may have only been able to give them a cursory glance, I would urge you to review the document and understand how the public has reacted in one of the neighborhoods most affected by the South District plan. Tonight, I will discuss each of these areas of concern, but I request that before you vote, you seriously consider each concern and vote to amend the South District plan accordingly. Our community has identified the 5 most common areas of concern as 1, the lack of transition to the existing neighborhood in the area immediately south of McAllister Court. 2, the reduction in required parking. 3, design sites being administratively changed following an approval. 4, the impact on education. And 5, access to emergency services. Concern 1, the lack of transition to the existing neighborhood in the area immediately south of McAllister Court. The area of greatest concern is the triangular plot of land immediately south of McAllister Court, right here that was highlighted earlier. The area lacks an adequate housing transition between the existing neighborhood and the proposed zoning in the South District plan. We ask the city to revise the South District plan to include T3 Neighborhood Edge and T3 Neighborhood General zoning in this area. When looking at the future land use map, one can easily identify areas of transition in other locations which are absent here. If you look east behind Langenberg Avenue, you will see a private civic space, an area of T3 Neighborhood Edge, and T3 Neighborhood General. Since a significant portion of Langenberg Avenue is contained within our homeowners association, we feel the neighborhood would have better continuity if a similar zone of transition were adopted on that triangular plot of land. Other areas of transition can be identified throughout the South District plan, but in the interest of time, I'll forego further analysis. One may assert the public civic space is an area of transition. However, the map fails to show the existing multi-use path, and it neglects to adequately show the bifurcation of the civic space. Furthermore, our HOA pays for the regular maintenance on the north side of the path and has done so for more than 7 years. Our concerns regarding this plot of land are not new. members of our neighborhood have expressed our concerns at planning and zoning and city council meetings dating back to 2013. More recently, in 2017, a developer submitted a design proposal using nearly identical plotting, road, and zoning maps to the proposed South District plan. When the proposal came to vote, the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council rejected the proposed development. Transcriptions from the meetings in 2017 note the City Council members expressed a desire for better transition between the existing neighborhood and any new development. On December 5th, 2017, when Commission member Fringe said, quote, I carefully went through the South District plan, and I went through some documents about missing middle and really tried to read through everything as carefully as possible again. If we try and pass this as missing middle piece to the community, this is going to be something that the community is not going to want in the future. It's a large area, almost 22 acres, and not one is non-multifamily, end quote. Fringe then went on to say this, I think we have to look towards balance as well, and that's why I think adding some other types of housing and transitioning would be in the best interest here. I think we are going to have opportunities for townhomes and zero lots in this area, and I really hate to put a huge block here when we can also pepper it through other portions of the South District.
Robert, your 5 minutes is up, so you can come back to that spot once everybody has an opportunity to speak.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the commission?
Good evening. I am Steve Gordon. I'm with AM Management, and we're a landowner down in this area. So, Mr. Chairman and Commission members, thank you for your time tonight and allowing us to speak. I was going to start with respectfully requesting more time for landowners, but I believe you answered my question, and if I don't finish, I'll come back up. So, thank you for that. We own 4 parcels that are part of the new form-based code. That area down there, and then that area over there. It's about 90 acres, I believe. I want to start with a little history, as our land holdings, as I believe with most of the land holdings in this area, predate any of your terms on this commission, and most, if not all, of current city staff. Most of us have owned this land a very long time. Our land was part of a 400-plus acre annexation into the city back in the mid-90s, and was part of a plan that has since become the Saddlebrook development. There was extensive negotiation over several years, covering many issues, including the size of the annexation and the zoning of the land once annexed. It was crucial to the city that this particular piece of ground down here was annexed into the city because they needed it for their wastewater treatment plant to make that contiguous with city limits, which was required. Much of this ground was zoned multifamily in the county before the annexation, and agreements were made between the landowners and the city to maintain those zonings. The land was annexed, the city got their treatment plant, and we got our zoning, or so we thought. The land here, again down in this area, was and currently is zoned IDRM. The ID designation was put on the land as a placeholder, we were led to believe, until city services were available. The RM was the zone, and then when the ID could be dropped, we would put a number behind the RM and move forward. We were shocked to find out in 2015 that this was not the case. The city deemed the ID zone as a specific zone, not a placeholder. You must rezone to be able to develop. The letters behind the ID were meaningless to the city, in our case RM, and since the zoning map and the comp plan was colored for low-density single-family, RS5 and RS8 is all we were told we could get. The city got its treatment plant. We did not get our expected zoning. We view our land as part of the Saddlebrook development. The 400 acres was acquired, consolidated, annexed through negotiation, and zoned as part of an overall business and development plan. All the pieces had to work together as a part of the whole to make the whole feasible. These parcels we own were and are a part of the whole, just waiting for their turn. Saddlebrook is a very nice community and has been a positive influence on the South District. Our feet were taken out from under us when we learned that the RM zone was not real. The form-based code will further erode the business and development plan that was put in place when what we thought was good faith negotiations brought this land into the city. Saddlebrook is a large development that has been and continues to be built out over many years. To date, we have built and rented and sold almost 800 units. We do not yet know what will be built on our remaining land. The market of good ideas will tell us when the time is right. Maybe a preschool to take advantage of all the nature in this area is a good idea. Maybe a rehab center where elderly patients recovering from a setback can be outside and enjoy the quiet surroundings, or an assisted living community, or maybe a 55-plus co-op building. All very nice projects we have in this city currently. The current zoning code allows flexibility for these ideas and more to be discussed with staff, brought to you, the Planning and Zoning Commission, discussed in a public hearing, and eventually, after input from many, either approved as a good fit or not. Current zoning and the comp plan can be adjusted as time and ideas change. It's actually interesting, you had an example of that earlier tonight. There wasn't a presentation, but what you're going to hear about at the next meeting is a request to take an area that's slated for residential development and change it to intensive commercial along the IWV road. Is that a better use now than what was anticipated as residential years ago? That's hard to say, but discussions will take place, the public will weigh in, and a decision will be made. If intensive commercial is deemed the best use, the comp plan will be changed and the proper zoning will be put in place. The form-based code does not offer that flexibility. Street configurations are essentially set up. Lot sizes, and building types are mandated. If we wanted to build an assisting living center, say down in this area or right here, somewhere there, that we would not be able to. If we wanted to build an assisted living center, the current code allows us that flexibility. Again, we would put together a request, meet with city staff, come to you, and we would go through that process.
Steve, your 5 minutes.
5 minutes,
is up.
okay, thank you. I'll come back.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Who's ever next?
Mr. Chairman, could I suggest that we let the representative of the neighborhood association have his time to represent probably most of the people here in the room? I know in the past we've allowed developers extended time to discuss their development.
Well, I simply don't know how many people want to speak, and I'll certainly give him all the time he needs, but I want to get through everybody at least once.
Okay.
So people that don't have to sit here for the whole time, and so I just want everybody to feel like they had an equal opportunity to speak.
Fair enough.
So, all right, go ahead, please.
Good evening. My name is Alita Cruz-Feuerbach, and I'm representing our family who owns about 200 acres of ground that will be directly affected by what this proposal is, what you're looking for. Everything that Steve said I will go with, and he gives a nice background about how we thought we had a plan, we thought we were talking with the right people at the right time, and now things have changed. I will start with saying that I have not read the entire theses. My comments are based on diagrams, conversations, and trying to read what looks to be pertinent to us. We own Pleasant Valley Golf Course. It's not being shown there, but that's us. The ground directly to the east of it is about 70 acres that we have always intended to be developed into single-family homes. When we built the golf course, we said originally we wanted to build a fine public course. We did that with our money, our time. We then said we wanted to build a nice clubhouse. We've done that. We are now at the third phase where we want to build a nice, traditional, single-family golf course community. We've been landowners in Iowa City and Johnson County for over 50 years. I think we've done a pretty good job of tending to the raw ground that we've owned through our garden center, through the golf course. We understand keeping good and maintaining good. We've been part of the meetings with the city planners, the California-based consultants, but we feel our concerns, our wishes, our dreams, and our history have fallen on deaf ears. We also find very little flexibility in the current plan. We see many obstacles that would lend to a higher cost for development, poor use of the rolling terrain and topography of our ground, and it would be almost impossible to offer the custom, high-quality, single-family homes that we had sought for. Two major concerns. When we got started with the golf course, we were told Sycamore Street was not going to be extended. We have a strip of ground right up against our course. We own the 70 acres east of the course. Now, Sycamore Street is supposed to be extended into what they tell us will be a single-loaded street. Very expensive. That street not only will be straight down to the south side of our property, but then swing around, I'm told, and then come back up north. Basically a racetrack, a single-loaded racetrack at our expense. If we're trying to be concerned about green infrastructure, that makes no sense. It will create major runoff because of all of the concrete that's going to be put in. And it's not just on our property, it will be on the city's property, the soccer fields, and the green space further east of us. In our opinion, there's really no economic or ecological sense to constructing this road because there is already a main thoroughfare, and that's called Soccer Park Road. All you have to do, or we could do if we were allowed, is swing Sycamore across and use what's already there. The water is already there. City water hydrants are already in place. Yes, the road would have to be upgraded a bit, but why add more concrete to nice rolling hills and gentle topography? The second concern is the type of single-family homes that are going to be allowed. We're talking about missing middle, that's great, but there is no designation for T1 or T2 homes, none. What's talked about are homes that will be capped on square footage, garages want to be pushed back, side yards will be small, neighbors will be close, and we'll have straight streets. And that doesn't conform to what we've already developed with the undulating greens, winding fairways, and raised tees. The opportunity for a larger lot offering private open space is not there. Why can't the south side of Iowa City have homes similar to those built on the east, the west, and the north side of Iowa City? And I'm talking, as examples, Walnut Ridge, Windsor Ridge, Hickory Heights.
Lita, your 5 minutes is up. If you have more,
Thank you.
then
I'll be back.
All right, thank you.
Oh boy, here we go. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Barron. I'm the director of the Affordable Housing Coalition. I want to talk a little bit about how the Affordable Housing Coalition has engaged in this process. So when we listen to the City Council discuss this form-based code idea, we know that it's more than just a neighborhood experiment. It's really a vision for how our community builds more inclusive housing opportunities as we move forward together. The City Council very much anticipates that a similar model to this can be used for infill development and for new neighborhoods that are annexed into the city over time. So what you're looking at here today is not just a vision for a single neighborhood, but rather a new plan that more accurately reflects the values that our community has identified. Values of affordable and inclusive housing, values of climate action and ecological sensitivity, and values of accessibility for all of our neighbors. I certainly do not want you to pass this plan if you don't think that this new plan reflects those three values that our community has identified. But what I am going to ask you to do is to reject arguments that we've heard many, many times before, and I will say have gotten more sophisticated as the years have gone on. Thanks for that. But really do still reflect an idea that a property owner's rights extend beyond their property line, especially if they own expensive homes. We just can't accept that in our community anymore. We have to move forward with a vision that recognizes that Iowa City is a community that values that economic diversity and inclusion. And so we must come up with a housing vision that encourages a variety of housing types and price points. And that's really your mission today, is to determine whether or not this meets those important goals that we've set forward as a city. There will be a lot of arguments made that aren't even necessarily true. And I trust you all to look at the facts about how neighborhood development impacts things like the prices of homes nearby. There's simply no evidence that a bigger variety of housing types would have any impact at all on that. And so those are the kinds of facts I really want you to root out as you consider whether or not this is something you want to support, and reject the rhetoric and the fear that comes with change, but really affirm the value and the vision that we have for moving forward as a community. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Next.
Hi, my name is Jolia Shaw, and I am one of the board of directors for the Sandhill Estates Homeowners Association. I actually live on McAllister Court, and so my backyard actually will be, in effect, directly adjacent to a T4 designated area. First, I want to kind of piggyback on to kind of what Bob was saying, one of our other directors, that the current plan that you see on the screen here, again, doesn't really address the historical concerns that not only did the P&Z Commission address in 2017, but also City Council recommendations when they voted against the last plans of for the South District. The missing middle, we've all been talking about the missing middle, and Kirk had a map on there ranging from T1 all the way to T4. But as you can see, that map actually, where there is existing neighborhoods, single-family homes, much of that is afforded the T3 neighborhood edge. Unfortunately, most of Sandhill Estates is not being granted that same luxury of having a neighborhood edge surrounding our neighborhood. We go basically directly from our single-family homes to the green space that we feel is exaggerated in this map to directly to a T4. So basically, my backyard will be adjacent to a walking trail, and directly across from there, a small green space easement, and then a street and potentially an apartment complex. One thing is for sure, we all live in Iowa, and we all know what happened in Dyersville not too long ago. And we're very familiar with the phrase, if you build it, they will come. This is, as they described, about a 900-acre project. And when talking with Ann Russett, she indicated to us this particular plan with the T3, T4, and so forth is anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 dwelling units. Iowa City's average, information again we got from Ann, was 2.5 people living in each dwelling unit. So we're looking at a development in this 900 acres of anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 people added to our population in Iowa City. Now, to give you a perspective on that, Johnson County has Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Tiffin, Solon, Lone Tree, University Heights, Swisher, Hills, Oxford, Shueyville, and North Liberty alone is 20,083 based on Google. I Googled the population. So we're looking at putting the entire city of North Liberty in our backyard. That's very, very compact. And with that in mind, I want to go to address the concern from our neighborhood with parking. California consultant talked about missing middle. They talked about sense of community and narrow streets, including on-street parking as part of the parking requirements to create neighborhoods. But unfortunately, Opticos is talking about California. We live in Iowa. We have 20 below weather. We have a foot of snow on the ground. As much as walkable areas might be nice, it's not practical. Like I said, if you build it, they will come. But regardless of how much parking you offer them, they're going to bring their cars. Very evident in Iowa City, all across Iowa City. Iowa City has always had the challenge of parking. And one of the pictures I think they presented in the T4 intersection that's just north of Alexander Elementary was a picture of Poncheros downtown, where it would be businesses on the bottom and apartment buildings on top. We all know what parking looks like at Poncheros on the corner of Clinton Street and Washington Street. It's atrocious. Like I said, the sense of community.
That's 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Next.
Good evening. My name is Alex Heckman, and I am the president of the Sandhill Association, Neighborhood Association, and I live at 843 McAllister Court. And first, would like just to thank the commission for hearing our comments this evening, and a special thank you to all the participants here and from our neighborhood. And I'm just grateful for your attendance. And we'll continue on and echoing some of the comments as have already been addressed, but also hopefully kind of address some of the concerns that our neighborhood has that we'd like to bring to the commission. So as Julia continued on with some of the concerns, I'd also like to continue on. So I'll talk first about the impact on education. So our children are very important to us. I came from the ice cream social this evening at Alexander Elementary, where my youngest go to school, and has been addressed or has been mentioned that the size of this area will put some strain potentially on the Iowa City School District. And from Ann's comments earlier, it seems like they've talked about with the school district somewhat, but just want to ensure that the safety is there as well, as we're thinking about just the sheer number of families that will be moving into this part of the community, and that going along with the school, there was a time when there were temporary buildings at Alexander prior to these units and homes going in. And so just want to make sure that the commission considers that as they're considering the South District plan and the impact that it will have. So I just want to make sure that the city has a plan to address and support our schools during that period of growth, and understand what steps are being taken and how does the city plan to address the safety as for our children when the roads and neighborhoods become more populated, especially in close proximity to the school, which our children love today, and biking to school. So another item of concern that was also Bob addressed as well was some of the design sites administratively kind of changing of the approval process as well. Historically, the city has encouraged developers to communicate with adjacent neighborhoods with new development when new development plans are proposed, and these discussions can be beneficial for both parties. However, the announcement that the design sites can be administratively adjusted at the subdivision level after approval raises some concern. And our concern is once agreements are set, either formally or informally, between developer and our adjacent neighborhood, administrative adjustments without notice may violate expectations or create tensions between the parties. and we understand the desire to make these processing adjustments easier. However, we feel this could be negatively used. So, and we advocate that if adjustments to design sites are requested, that there should be a public notification and response period allowed for these changes. And finally, the last concern as well of just the access to emergency services, and grateful that that was reiterated again. So we love our neighborhood and want to make sure that there, and as this area continues to get developed, that it will have the sufficient infrastructure accordingly. So as we also went around and chatted with the our wonderful neighbors and friends, some of the other concerns that brought up is just that I'd like to address as well are that wanted to ensure that there were parks and added green space in the area as well. So particularly neighborhood parks that contain, children's play equipment was one comment that was brought up, and as well with the Iowa City 2030 comprehensive plan mentioned goals of environmental sustainability, but the code does not make recommendations for use of sustainable materials, nor does it have recommendations for minimum installations of alternative energy sources or outline goals for building efficiency certification. So those were a couple other comments that were brought up as well as we were going around. So we're grateful for kind of the ambitious undertaking that this is and a lot of work that's gone into it. But hope that some of these concerns that we've brought forward on behalf of our neighborhood association are heard, and you understand the passion that we have for it as well, because we love our neighborhood so much. And thank you for your time and for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you, Alex. Who's ever next?
I'm Dawn Eckrich. We live at 1109 Langenberg Avenue. We are fortunate that out the windows of our great room and our dining room that we overlook the area that's being discussed. I really cannot fathom that maybe 8,000 people would live in that small space. I have to ask the city staff, is there another development in Iowa City that would be similar to this? Does one exist?
For the public hearing, it's really an opportunity for the public to address the commission. It's not for a back and forth.
Well, I don't know how the Peninsula neighborhood is laid out. Maybe it's like this. I don't know. But having grown up in Iowa City, I'm real sketchy on if there's any development like this. I don't understand the need for such high intensity housing. I know we want to get housing available for everyone. It seems like it's going to turn the area into a apartment or condo area, tall buildings, a lot of people. And that's not really what we want in the city. We want things spread out and people to have room. To me, this looks like people aren't going to have any room around there. I wonder about parking. A 26-foot wide street doesn't allow for on-street parking. So in these high intensity, 12-plexes and such townhouses, will there be ample parking in parking lots? That's a big concern. Every home in Iowa City or apartment has 2 people living in it with 2 cars. If they have teenagers, that's 3 or 4 cars. And that's a situation that's troubling in town. I don't see this as a place for student housing. I see this as a place for the citizens of town, not students. It's too far from campus for students unless you're a married couple. Boy, it's a shame that the use has such high intensity, will have such high intensity population, especially near a school. But the buffer is a concern. We back up to this, so the buffer is a concern. I see a little green strip, so maybe we'll have, 4 or 5 feet before we get to a row of townhouses, but we'll have to see what happens. I know there's not developers that are interested in developing this right now. I have personal knowledge of that from the Lehman family. And perhaps if it was less dense housing, that sort of plan would fly. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Who's ever next?
Hello, my name's Tim Lehman. I'm representing my families. I've got 8 siblings that we own the property that is just south of Langenberg Avenue there, and Alexander School was built on our farm here a few years ago. There's about 135 acres still existing there. And then I'm also part owner of the 100 acres that's on the east side of Sycamore Street. I own that with Maureen Gatons. It was the original Gatons family farm. And Andy Backenstead is my other partner in that. We'd love to develop this land. My family's farmed it for, gosh, since the 1960s. I have a brother that lives on the farm down there. The livestock out there is my family's livestock. Is our family's livestock. I'm still involved in the farm. I'm actually a local realtor here in Iowa City. So we've got about 235 acres there that's right there that we would love to develop it, but we want to develop it the right way. We've been to a lot of the meetings here over the last couple of years. Prior to Alexander School being built on the farm, we actually had visits with the city, and we'd actually spent about $8,000 to $10,000 with a local engineering company, looking about how we could develop it, putting streets in, putting some plans in there. And it was going to be what I would call conventional housing, similar to what's up there on Sandhill Estates and what's up there in Langenberg Avenue. But that $8,000 or $10,000 worth of planning was thrown out the window when this new planning and zoning was going to be presented to us. We would, like I say, we'd love to develop it, but we want to see it developed in the right way. And we've been to a lot of meetings, and we just don't understand this. We can't seem to wrap our arms around this new zoning that you're trying to put in here. We've had absolutely no one reach out to us. The McAllister Boulevard went in there, and we thought that might have some developers reach out to our family, talk to us about maybe what they could envision there, but we have absolutely no one that's talked to us. I think a lot of the local developers are not sure what they can build here, or if they can. They just don't seem to know what they can build, or if they can afford to build it, or where to even start. That's all I have.
Thank you, Tim. Whoever's next would like to speak?
Hi, my name's Rachel Sharp. I live at 1043 Langenberg Ave. I am a first-time home buyer. We purchased our house in August or late January, and we come in to find all of this out. And please mind my shaky voice. I'm a bit nervous. I've never been to anything like this before. When we bought our house, we loved the fact that it was backed to a field. And I didn't expect it to be that way forever. But I also didn't expect it to immediately be high-density housing. I agree with everything that the HOA has stated before. I think Robert said things excellently. I just wanted to come up here and show like the face of somebody who's actually being impacted by this. Like first-time home buyer coming in to have my backyard be a commercial zone, I think is kind of ridiculous, but I just wanted to say, I agree with my HOA. I feel that there should be some form of buffer between us and high density. I mean, sure, I believe it could go in there, but it doesn't have to be right up against our neighborhood. So just wanted to come up and say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Who's ever next? Are there any other first-time speakers?
Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Dukeman. I live at 868 McAllister Court. I moved in there about 2 years ago, and I work at the hospital, and I have a new 3-week-old daughter. So that's just a little background about me. Some of the things that concerned me about the current proposal is kind of piggyback on what some other people have said, but the overall density of the proposal is concerning. As people have mentioned, this is potentially 4,000 to 8,000 home units, which could vary anywhere from 10,000 to potentially 25,000 people. When you look at the population of Iowa City, that is an increase of 15 to 25% of the population of Iowa City. When you look at the overall land area that includes, and this isn't even just developed land, but overall land area of all of Iowa City, it's about 5%. So you're potentially expanding the population of the city by 25% into 5% of its area. That in and of itself isn't terribly concerning. I think, I've lived when I was a medical student here, I lived in a apartment complex on Harlock Street that was directly adjacent to single homes, and it was a multiplex. I think we lived in pretty good harmony. But what I am concerned about is the lack of clear infrastructure that's going to be provided to this new proposed area. As an employee at the hospital, I already see the strain of healthcare, and this is even before the COVID pandemic. Within the two years that I've been at McAllister Court, I've had things stolen from our home, and I contacted the police department, and no one ever got back to us about the things that were stolen. The police never contacted me back. So that already suggests to me that the South District already, and this is just anecdotal, but perhaps that there's not enough infrastructure in that area already, and now you're proposing adding 15 to 25% of the population of Iowa City into that area further. And without clear areas of additional infrastructure supporting that area, you're not creating an equal community at all. If you want to put this many people into an area, you need to provide them with the appropriate infrastructure to support those people, especially a population as large as this, and then that will be as densely packed or not packed, but as densely put into this area. So that's my biggest concern about the proposal, is the lack of clear infrastructure support. It's encouraging to hear that they have a potential plan for a fire department on Cherry. It would be nice to hear that that's more definitive rather than just potentially down the road. There's not a single medical clinic south of Highway 6 to provide support for that community thus far. I do know that there's these commercial nodes that could potentially have clinics, but I do not think that these small commercial nodes will be able to support, even with infrastructure buildings, to be able to support the amount of people that are going to be in this place, potentially. 15 to 25 or 10 to 25,000 additional people, up to 25% of the population of Iowa City in this small area. And I don't think that equal infrastructure support is being supplied to this area as the remainder of Iowa City. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. Any other first-time speakers?
Good evening, Celeste Vincent, 1563 Langenberg Avenue. Lifelong resident of Iowa City, original homeowner, Langenberg Avenue. Just asking you to look at what is, when we look at comprehensive Iowa City and all sides of Iowa City, is what is being proposed, is it fair and equitable for the south side of Iowa City? Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. Any other first-time speakers? Second call for first-time speakers.
Hi, my name is Jessica Elliott. I live on at McCollisher Court at 853. I just want to say a second. Everything that everybody has said so far, I support them completely, and just would like to say that I agree completely with those things. The lack of parking, the lack of buffer between our neighborhood, and I bought my house 4 years ago. I was told that there would probably be some development, some parks, some buildings, some homes, townhouses, and whatever. 4 years ago, they told me that. And now they're doing this high density, I know that it wouldn't always stay fields, but I moved here from Arizona. I chose Iowa City because of what it looks like out the back of my house. And I knew that it wouldn't always stay that way. I knew some stuff would go up there. But Iowa City is the most beautiful place I have ever been in my entire life. And I'm not joking. I picked this place because of what it looks like out my backyard. I don't want my kids to grow up in a big city. I don't want them to grow up in a concrete jungle surrounded by buildings. I want them to see the fields and ride their bikes, and I don't want this density. I just got my kid a bike. I don't want there to be so much traffic on these roads and so many people on these roads that I can't let my kid go up where I can't see him because I'm scared to death he's going to get hit by a car. And I don't want this to be developed this way because I don't feel any of my neighbors want it. This is Iowa City, and these are the people of Iowa City. This isn't what the people of Iowa City want. I also want to bring up that I was recently a member of our HOA board, and I ethically feel like I need to make a statement that Kirk Lehman, who is part of the city, joined our board in 2019. He did not disclose to us the extent of his involvement with this project. And until July 1st, when he had to disclose to the public, he did not disclose to us. He took on the HOA presidency. He was deceitful. And in the fact that he had no integrity to disclose to us what his involvement was when he ethically disclosed it to his employer, I do not feel like I feel like he did the wrong thing by me. I don't know how my neighbors feel about it, but he did the wrong thing by me. He participated in us discussing how we felt about this plan going forward.
Can we please talk about the zoning issue and not personal slander?
The issue is that he has been discussing with the HOA board and how we will proceed with this plan, this project, how we would confront this. Our neighborhood, the HOA of Sandhill Estates, stood the biggest against the last proposal, and we struck it down. And he came in from the city, listened to all our, and I'll even give you a better thing. This ding dong recused himself because he knows he has a conflict of interest. Listen to our conversations for years. There's something on this proposal now saying that he wants to be administratively able to make changes. He'll tell us we're going to build townhouses. And then without letting us know, he can turn around and say, or a 16-plex, whatever. That's our HOA president.
We have heard your concerns. Kirk disclosed this to us, and it was my legal conclusion that he did not have a conflict of interest. So
he recused himself because he felt he did have a conflict of interest. And at the time he disclosed it to you, he should have disclosed it to us.
In terms of a legal conflict for his role with the city, your board interactions are a private matter. So just for the record.
Any first-time speakers? Any remaining first-time speakers to discuss the issue before us tonight?
Anyone have a pen? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Sharp. I live at 1043 Langenberg Avenue in Iowa City. For the last 6 years, I served the U.S. Army on active duty as a combat medic and practical nurse. Got out of the service and moved to a quiet town in Iowa. I suffer from PTSD, among other things, and when we moved into our home, my wife and I, Rachel, loved the fact that there was a field, and we were told that it was going to remain low density, nothing to worry about. And now brand new homeowners come to find out that, I don't understand all this. I'm not going to lie to you. Again, Army. But it's really disappointing to spend all this money on such a beautiful home and not know what the future holds for this place. I forget who said it before, but talking about, the impact on our healthcare system, how we're going to provide adequate care for patients. If we're already struggling to do that now, well, what's the plan? Like, where can people get care? If you're talking about 15% of the current population going into this small area, I see big problems with that, and I'm deeply concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any other first-time speakers?
I'm just returning the pen I stole.
All right, thank you very much. Second call for first-time speakers. Seeing no more first-time speakers, we'll start with Robert. You want to come back up? And again, 5 minutes, Robert.
Okay, just to sort of reiterate, first of all, my speech is entirely written, and other members have talked about many of the things, so I'm going to try to scale it back in real time here. We'll see how this goes. But to recap where I was at, I had just talked about former council member or commission member Freerks talking about having townhomes and zero lots in this area and not having huge blocks of homes. And this was up into that corner area, just to reiterate. So in that same discussion from December 5th, 2017, Commission member Parsons said, quote, "If you take out the single family, you kind of take out that transition. And if we did it over again, I would like to see a transition between that," meaning the triangular area, "and the single family neighborhood," end quote. And on that same date, former Mayor Throgmorton said, quote, "The development should enhance and be compatible with the existing neighborhood. It should also make a transition from single-family housing on the east to some higher density structures on the far end of the west near the intersection of McAllister and Gilbert. In between, there should be a full range, a broad range of missing middle type housing, so you see and feel a transition. The core idea is it's got to feel like a neighborhood, and it does not feel like a neighborhood now when I see it, when I look at it," end quote. The current South District Plan does not address any of the historical recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission nor the City Council. We are simply asking for you to not vote for an approval of the South District Plan until this particular area has been addressed and the zoning has been modified to account for a better level of transition. We've been down this road before, with designs that closely follow the proposed South District Plan. Let us not forget our history and do our best to avoid the mistakes of the past. The right thing is to modify the zoning to account for a better transition. It's better to do this now than to ignore our past and ideologically follow a mistake into the future. Concern number 2 was a reduction in parking, and try to reiterate some of this, not reiterate so much of it. So it's no secret that parking has been a challenge in certain parts of Iowa City. So it's curious why a critical piece like parking would have the minimum standard reduced. While it's not outrightly expressed, there is clearly a push within the city to emphasize street parking. The reasoning may be obtained from articles written by the consultants the city hired as part of the development of the South District Plan, meaning Opticos. In Dan Paralek's article, he's a member of Opticos, What's Right for the Site, Analyzing the Missing Middle. This is an article that was previously included in planning and zoning packets. A couple of assertions were made. First, to create a sense of community, it's advisable to make narrow streets. And second, Dan states, quote, "Be sure to include on-street parking. Push the municipality to enable you to count this parking towards your required parking count. And this is exactly what's happening in the South District Plan. This theory may have worked well in Novato, California, where the article highlights various designs and other intended successes. However, in Novato, they aren't accounting for January and February, where temperatures could reach negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and cars parked on the streets may fail to start. They aren't accounting for days between November and April where 8 or more inches of snow may fall, and plows need to clear streets to allow doctors, nurses, first responders, and other critical personnel to travel to work to maintain people's health and safety. Not to mention, alleyways make snow removal even more difficult and potentially create areas of maintenance that are not well defined. With that said, the goal of achieving a sense of community is great. However, we must understand that certain applications of ideologies may not be suitable across the board. A reduction in the minimum required parking is not appropriate here. We understand the viewpoint that reducing the required parking may encourage residents to use more man-powered means of transportation. However, this isn't entirely practical and likely won't be practiced year-round by the majority. People like their vehicles, and attempts to artificially limit parking will not change the population's practice of owning vehicles. Looking towards the future, electric vehicle sales will increase substantially in the coming years. Problems may arise if an inadequate number of parking spaces are available on a per-dwelling basis. Since battery electric vehicles require a tether to charge, the long-term expectation of street parking may not be sufficient. For populations, future populations will likely prefer to charge their vehicles at their dwelling. The reduction in required parking and emphasis on street parking will lead to greater street congestion and holds potential to jeopardize the safety and well-being of our neighborhood's residents. So I'm going to skip over the design sites being administratively approved. Alex hit on that, and then, but I'd like to say something a little bit more about education. So this is 4,000 to 8,000 dwellings added to this area with an anticipated population of 10 to 20,000 people. For a little perspective, of the 748 cities in Iowa, the increase in population of the proposed South District Plan would make it by itself the 25th to 40th largest city in Iowa. This population equivalence puts the South District Plan in population between Pella and North Liberty.
Robert, you're at 5 minutes again, so you'll have to come back for the third time.
Cool.
All right. Second speaker, Alita.
I was almost done the first time around. I would just mention the fact that we've talked about the history, and this has been on the books since 2017. Well, we've been around since, I would think, forever. I'm one of the unusual. There are some other ones here who have been born and raised in Iowa City. I left for a while, came back. This is something that has been on the burner for us for over 50 years. So it is personal. And the folks who are talking about high density, that is what we're talking about also. The runoff, the extra concrete, all of those things, in our opinion, is not necessary. I know that there's been a lot of time and effort and taxpayer money spent on this and getting this document to everybody. And I appreciate the fact that city doesn't want to change because they've got so much of an investment. However, I do think that this committee should recognize, as it's been said before, that we are in the Midwest. We are Iowa. And what works for us is not necessarily going to be the same as what works in a major metropolitan city on the West Coast. For all of those reasons, we ask respectfully that our ground be left out of this current plan and all the rules that go with it. And we hope that this committee and the City Council will be respectful of all property owners' rights in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve, you want to come up next?
Thank you. I was saying that we don't believe the form-based code offers a lot of flexibility for some desired project types. If we wanted to build an assisted living facility in this area, the current code would allow us at least an opportunity to request a comp plan change and a zoning change for that idea. There are no tools in the form-based code that allows that flexibility. Maybe a house of worship thinks that this would be a perfect place for them. We can plat that under the current RS8 zoning and approval from the Board of Adjustments. Again, we don't feel there's any tool under this code that would allow for that sort of that size of lot and structure. So as Alita just mentioned, we request that our 2 parcels of land be removed from the code and remade under their current zoning, which is RS8 and IDRM. A couple of other points. Public Works recently approached us about acquiring 20 acres of land in this piece down here. The state requires a 1,000-foot buffer from any inhabitable structure to expand, upgrade, or replace an existing treatment facility. So to prepare for future expansion, Public Works wants to create this buffer before any structures get built, which makes a lot of sense. Assuming a fair and reasonable price can be negotiated, this area will be purchased by the city. And again, it's about half this land, so it'll cut it about right in half there. This will leave a small piece of land on the far edge of the proposed form-based code area that is not conducive to mandated street alignments, single-loaded streets, lot and building size and building types. Flexibility and creativity will be essential in this area. We feel the same about this area up here as well. It feels isolated from the form-based code area and more part of the surrounding development developed under the current code than the form-based code area. So again, we are requesting that those 2 parcels be removed from this area. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the Riverfront Crossing form-based code. This is the other large area of form-based code in the city. It was developed as an additional tool for landowners in and around downtown to create projects with more of an urban feel. The keywords here, it was an additional tool. The current zones still exist in riverfront crossings. The form-based code is an option landowners have at their disposal to create the project they envision. They choose to rezone to the form-based code if it helps them achieve what they feel is best for their land. It allows many options for our urban core to grow based on the needs, wants, and desires of our community. At a minimum, I would ask that the Commission to treat the South District in an equal way as the Riverfront Crossing District was treated. If the new South District form-based code is adopted, make it an option for the area. Another tool that can be used to create the types of communities people want to live in, rent from, and buy into. If the form-based code is as good as staff has spent multiple hours telling you it will happen naturally, just like it does in the Riverfront Crossing District. It is being used there because it creates product that the community wants and is willing to support. Do not force it upon us with no other options. Give us South District landowners the same respect you gave the Riverfront Crossing landowners, and trust that we will use all the tools at our disposal to create a vibrant, sustainable, and feasible community. Thank you.
Steve. Anybody would like to speak for a second time that hasn't spoken for a second time yet? Last call for a second-time speaker. Robert, you want to come up for the third?
I'll try to do it real quick.
All right, thanks, sir.
All right. So basically, I had just finished talking about the population and how it would be huge and how that would put a massive strain on our schools and education, just the resources. And so that would require a massive amount of support from the city. Our area has been through a number of redistrictings in the past, and it has not been necessarily the best overall experience, knowing that like this year, our kids in the future are going to go to City High. Next year, they're going to go to West High, you know, and the following year, switching back, right? To go back to the last part, concern number 5 was the access to the emergency services. You know, it's great to hear what you're talking about with the fire department. The last thing that we had actually heard was that there was no more funding for that, and so that was not something that was going to be built. It's encouraging to hear that in the future that will be built, but we want to make sure that the infrastructure is there, and this will happen in a timely manner. As Bryce mentioned earlier, you know, he's in the healthcare field, and that our emergency rooms and things are overstaffed. Sorry, not overstaffed, overpopulated with patients. And so, you know, one of the things that we had made reference to in the letter was that we hope that the city would put an area or incentivize the creation of something like an urgent care medical facility or other sort of medical clinic that would be available to the residents. This is a massive amount of population that's being proposed in here. And if you don't have that infrastructure for health and safety, this is not going to necessarily be the best thing for people. And to sort of just conclude, you know, everybody here in this room, we're all sharing the same common goal. And that is, we want Iowa City to be the best city in the state. And we want to maintain that because we're all pretty much here feeling exactly this. And you've heard a ton of different things from various different viewpoints. Ours from our Homeowners Association, people who are currently landowners. You've heard from you know, others throughout the community. And I hope that you take all of these concerns really very seriously. And we hope that you make certain that you either amend the changes appropriately, as have been identified by the public, or quite possibly just vote no on the plan right now and reconsider things going forward. Because we've heard a tremendous amount of viewpoints from all over the place. And I commend everybody who's gotten up to speak tonight and give their opinion. In previous Planning and Zoning Commission meetings and City Council meetings, we generally haven't seen a huge population of people speaking. And so this is great. I'd like to applaud everybody who came up and had the courage to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Last call for anyone who would like to address the commission. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. So we'll go on to the next item, which is case number REZ 21-0005, consideration of a zoning code amendment to adopt form-based standards for new development as identified in the South District Plan.
Would the commission like to discuss the proposed comprehensive plan amendment? Staff is recommending approval of the comprehensive plan amendment. Or did you want to come back to it after the form-based code discussion?
Let's go back to that. Let's go ahead and do, let me find that.
Item 5.
All right. 500.
I think this is agenda item 5. Is that right, Kirk? I don't have an agenda.
It's item 5.
That's 5.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just looking
agenda item
for
5.
I'm still on 5. I'm just looking for the attachment. There we go. Looking right out. Okay. So on CPA 21-0001, a proposed amendment to the South District Plan to facilitate development.
That's correct, yeah. Staff is recommending approval of that. Now, I guess now is the opportunity for the commission to discuss if they want to make a motion on that tonight and or for approval or recommend deferral based on the comments that you received. If there's information that you'd like staff to bring back, I guess now is the time for the commission to discuss.
Okay. Discussion on?
I'm inclined to defer.
And defer with questions, or just defer for consideration?
For consideration.
Other discussion?
I would like to discuss it tonight, but, you know, I can make a motion, but if we don't have a second, we won't be able to talk about it. So I'll make a motion to talk to them.
What's your motion? Is your motion to approve it? We have.
Yeah, I'll
So your motion is to approve CPA 21-0001?
yeah.
Okay.
And I'll second it.
So we have let me write that down. Motion by Patron, second by Craig. All right, discussion.
Well, I think the plan is clear to me. It supports a diversity in the city, and I didn't hear anything that really caught my attention. I heard a lot of personal issues, but nothing major to make me question the entire plan. And I was a little bit concerned about parking, so last night I was looking at the number of car sales since 1951, and they have not increased. They're actually decreasing. So I think it would be wise to reduce the parking.
Other comments?
No?
Susan?
Well, you know, I've spent a lot of time with this, as I'm sure everybody in this room has. And when I think about what our role is, which is ultimately the public good, and how I agree with the person who said we all want Iowa City to be the best city it can be. When I look at the knowledge that I have of the city's strategic goals and the current comprehensive plan, I feel that this proposal is in keeping with the direction the city has taken and wants to take as expressed by the public. And I think personally, in 20 years, when this is all developed, I think your kids are going to be out of school probably before all of this is developed. This is going to be a stellar place to be in Iowa City. And for that reason, I mean, I think this is our job, and I'm in favor of approving it.
Yeah, and regarding the electric cars, I feel like I attended a few seminars that talk about electric cars, and what they were describing is like it's changing so rapidly that we still don't know if we're going to be charging cars in the streets or at home, or it's going to be the gas stations are going to be charging stations for cars. So we cannot say for sure right now that we're going to be charging our cars in the streets, and this is going to be, like, you know, they were talking about the time that takes charging an electric car. It takes much longer than putting gas in a car. But we don't know yet if we're going to be charging the cars at work or at home or in gas stations, all gas stations. So I feel that we cannot talk about that. Like that's gonna affect our street parking, because we don't know for sure where we're gonna charge the cars. And also there was another comment saying that the sales for electric cars had increased like 30%, but the numbers for car sales that I was looking at seems to...
Maria, can you speak into your microphone, because now that the audience is talking, we can't hear you anymore.
Yeah. That there was a comment that said that the electric car sales had increased like 29% or something like that in one of the emails that we received. But the overall car sales in the United States have been constantly decreasing in the last 45 years. So there was a peak in like the 65 and then another peak in 75. But then since that year, the car sales have been decreasing, and some years they go up a little bit and then they keep coming down. So I know that we all have the perception that we're getting more and more cars, but the data doesn't support that. So the reality is that there are not more cars. You know, you can look it up. So yeah.
All right. All right. Please withhold your comments, please. This is an opportunity now for the commission to have a discussion amongst themselves. The public hearing is over.
We were quiet when you talked. We'd appreciate you being quiet when we talked.
I was involved in the very initial discussions with Opticos when they came here and they interviewed board commission members. This is my 7th year on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I don't know how many dozens and dozens of public hearings, and the one consistent thing I've heard in 7 years is the absence or the missing middle for housing choice. If I'd have to say what's the one thing I've heard over and over in 7 years, that's it. I mean, I applaud everybody for coming here, and I appreciate everything you've said. But I've been at every P&Z meeting for 7 years, and so I've listened to thousands of people talk. And it's very consistent. The issue in Iowa City is the missing middle and the ability for people to afford housing. I live in the South District. I have since 1993. This is not theoretical for me, and I won't make a dime off selling property. My backyard is a field, and it will be developed someday. And I've always known that, because I knew at the very beginning that if I had concerns about the development next to me, I needed to buy that property. And I never bought that property. So that's just the way it is. I believe strongly in the promoting walkability of the neighborhood to try to decrease the number of cars so everybody doesn't have to be in a car for everything, and you don't have to drive somewhere to be able to go to get a gallon of milk. The problem the South District's always had is Highway 6 is like the Mississippi River. It just cuts us off from the rest of the city. And that's an issue I brought up for years, and something we really need to work together as cooperatively with the city to try to make it so it's easier to cross Highway 6 for kids, because right now you can't. And that's a big issue. I believe really strongly in the development of the commercial in the neighborhood commercial, so that people, as I said before, right now you can't buy a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread. You have to get in your car and go somewhere. And it sure would be nice for somebody to be able to on their bicycle or walk down and be able to get that. I've heard many people talk about the density. No, the density, the heavy numbers you're talking about is strictly theoretical if it was a T4 and the people built the maximum bulk they could for the maximum number of people. That's simply not going to happen. There's not developers who are going to build that. And we're talking decades in the future. I personally believe that the form-based code will turn this into a preferred area in Iowa City. Because right now, you know, South Side, the city's kind of turned a blind eye to it for decade after decade, and that's how we've gotten where we are. And this is the first time I think there's an opportunity to actually make things right and make so this is a family-friendly area where people will want to move. There's so much open space in the South District, it's unparalleled for the rest of Iowa City. I really believe, and I know change is hard. It's scary, and I get it. I just simply disagree with many of the assertions that were made. I think from 7 years of experience has told me that the worst never happens, and that change has to happen. And understandings and maybe even agreements were made decades before, they're simply just not applicable to future councils and future commissions. They just aren't. And so I apologize if people believe something 20 years ago and maybe assertions were made or maybe even promises, but they're just not binding on future councils, and that's just the way the reality is. So I will support this and support it gladly. And I do this as a person who actually lives in the South District, not somebody who's worried about profiting from sales of property in the South District.
And I would say, I've only been on the commission for a little over a year, and that is, of all the things that I take from the meetings that I've had, people need housing. The city needs to have diversified housing options. And I think that's a neighborhood. Some of our most successful neighborhoods are neighborhoods that have diversified housing. I think this is a good proposal.
Further discussion?
Staff, can you kind of explain to me and to the audience the difference between the plan amendment and then the zoning amendment, and what the two achieve and accomplish?
Sure. The proposed amendment that you're discussing right now is the comprehensive plan amendment to the South District Plan, which includes some changes to goals and objectives in the plan, which is changes to policy. And it also changes the future land use map, which is also land use policy. The second item, or the next item on your agenda, is the form-based code, which would help implement the policy direction that's laid out before you right now. It will include changes to the text of the zoning code. It is not a proposal to change the zoning map. So it will include, the text amendment will include standards and regulations that will be applied to future development that is on land that is rezoned to a form-based zone. So even after the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and the proposed form-based code, to develop in this area under these rules, the land must be rezoned, it must be subdivided, and in some cases it also needs to be annexed into the city.
Billy?
I was just listening to some of the comments, and one of the young ladies said that there were people didn't walk in the wintertime, and I look out my window in the wintertime and people are walking. I'm at the top of Kimball Road, and they walk and they ride bicycles after the snow. Don't understand it, but they do it. So I don't see why that's a concern, that people wouldn't want a walkable community. My concern with my comments about the information that was given is in the proposed amendment. You talked about the history of that area, of this area, and the Native Americans that were here before. And I'm wondering if anything is going to happen to have that history of who was here first captured, so that there's maybe a museum or something. And then also in the South District Plan, it talked about street names. And I noticed that there were some very nice names, but we also have a African-American mayor who, Teague Street. We have a Royce Ann Porter, who's the first African-American woman who is on the Board of Supervisors. Lulu Johnson, who Johnson County now is named after. These are street names that I'd like to see reflected in that area, so that we capture some of that history.
Any further discussion? Mr. Sines?
Yeah. I'm, what I'm struggling with right at this very moment is dealing with this and the understanding that, 5 years from now, changes can happen again. And I think that's something we forget, and something I'm reminded of as I'm thinking through this all. Because the needs and wishes of the community do change over time. And so anything whatever is decided here tonight and in 2 weeks or 4 weeks by city council, it doesn't mean that down the road change happens. I mean, this development is a result of change of the previous plan, which was a change over the previous plan. That's the nature of growth. I'm struggling with a couple issues here. I'm a little concerned about that triangle of land by McCollister Court and McCollister Boulevard, because we have had that conversation before, and I hear what the neighbors are saying there. I struggle a little bit with the use of the pieces of ground on the south and east that are highlighted there, the ones that have been requested to be removed. I've been part of that conversation since before I was on this commission, before I was on the HCDD, the other commission I was on. And I hear your comment about there's no guarantees, and again, and it's very true. I mean, the council 20 years ago, the staff 20 years ago may have had something, but I've been part of I've been part of that discussion for probably 10 years now, and I have concerns over the way it was handled. So I'm stuck with that. But beyond that, I think that everything that we're attempting to do here is where the public, over many years, over many input sessions, over many conversations, has led us to, as Commissioner Craig said. And I think that's the part that, I think that we really have to look at here. I've taken 6 pages of notes, so trust me, I've listened to you. I've mentioned to the commission before that, I used to live in the Sherman Hill district in Des Moines, which is a perfect example of a historic mixed-use neighborhood. And it was one of the most sought-after neighborhoods in town. It was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in town because everybody wanted to live there. So I really do believe that the demand for mixed use is something that the public has said they want. What happens is, when that butts up against, typically against single-family neighborhoods, that's when we have this feedback. We have been dealing with this idea since 2015, and this is the largest crowd we've ever had, and the crowd is here from one neighborhood. And I talk about that every time we have this situation. As Mike pointed out, he's been here for 10 years. I've been here for 6.5 now. And we've had conversations. I was at those neighborhood meetings in 2015. I also live in the South District. I have since 2004. I'm a very happy resident, and I've been involved in all those conversations since 2015. I've been involved in the Grant Wood Neighborhood Association, which since has merged with the Weatherby Neighborhood Association, which is now the South District Neighborhood Association. And never have we had this large a crowd at any of those discussions. But as often is the case when we have issues that we don't get involved until it impacts our backyard, and we heard that very clearly tonight. The reality is, I've said it many times before, if you don't own the land, you don't control the land. And someone in one of the letters said that, their realtor said, and I am a realtor in town, and I've never said that. And I think anyone who believes that a cornfield is always going to remain a cornfield is somewhat naive. And I appreciate, I will say, most of you who've spoken about that said you understood it would be developed sometime. We have a lot of people that don't understand that, and so I appreciate your understanding of that. I think, someone talked about city goals and the Iowa City vision. I think it was Sarah. I've been through all these meetings. I agree. I think this is reflective of all those meetings and all the wishes of the community as a whole. And I think we do have to, as a commission, have to represent the community as a whole. I did want to point out, there's been a lot of discussion about the huge amount of units in this neighborhood, and by my rudimentary longhand math, If there were 8,000 units in that neighborhood, we're only talking 8.5 units per acre, which is basically RM8 residential development. If we're talking anything less than 8,000 units, we're going to get potentially close to RM5, which is the biggest residential development classification we have. So really 900 acres and 8,000 units is not that big a deal. It's residential neighborhood density, which I find kind of fascinating when you do that math. There's been some comments about the infrastructure not being in place. There's been some concerns about the school. Although I'm gathering, based on tonight's comments, it's more about safety of kids and transportation and whatnot. And there's been honestly, there has been a lot of studies and a lot of information that narrower streets slow traffic and actually make for a more walkable neighborhood. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that when we have these grid systems, and that's what promotes walkability and safety. You've got McCollister Boulevard, but that's a major thoroughfare that has a strip down the center. It has crosswalks built into the length of the neighborhood, and it'll continue to have that. What I'm struggling with right now is those two parcels of land that I have I have concerns about. The plan as a whole, I think, is fine. The two pieces of land could be adjustments could be made on those pieces of land in the future. Certainly, they can come back before commission. They can come back before council. The other thing to keep in mind is, regardless of what we say and do here tonight, ultimately this next goes to city council, who has the ultimate decision-making power in any of these things. And so I assume we'll see you all there. I'll be anxious to hear the will of the rest of the commission.
All right. Any further discussion? Last call for further discussion. All right, we had a motion by Padron, a second by Craig. All those in favor of approving the motion for approving CPA 21-0001 signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, the motion passes unanimously. Now, we can get back to case number REZ 21-0005. Consideration of a zoning code amendment to adopt form-based standards for new development as identified in the South District Plan. Kirk, are you it?
Yep, I'll take it over from here. So for background for the zoning code, obviously this has been part of the same project, so I won't belabor the point on that. I did want to address or just reiterate the differences between the comp plan and the zoning code. So the comp plan is what guides the future land use direction for the area. It doesn't affect any of the standards related to parking, any of the specific standards related to height or building types. Those are all guided by the zoning code amendment, and so that's what we'll be talking about now. So getting into the draft code then, we've been talking about this the last two meetings, very lengthy presentations on them, so I will try to breeze through them somewhat, section by section, and I'll highlight the larger points that I think stand out the most. So the introduction, we've really talked about the goals of it. It lays out the goals, and it also talks about how the code would be implemented were the proposed zoning code amendment adopted. So as that works, the first step is the comprehensive plan. The zoning code has to match the comprehensive plan, so we are proposing to amend the zoning code right now. Following that would be a rezoning, where they would take a zoning designation that's in the code and apply it to a particular parcel of land. and you would rezone to a form-based code, or a form-based zone, just like any other zone in the city. So it would be similar to riverfront crossings in that way. This isn't a blanket rezoning. It would be the same process as it would be if you were a property owner in riverfront crossings. Even if you have zoning that's in the city already, you could develop under that zone. So it would be a standard map rezoning. Staff recommends that these things happen concurrently with the preliminary plat, because that is when you create individual parcels. In this case, the zones affect what the parcels are, so you could zone it before, but it doesn't have to occur that way. You could zone it before if you engineer everything in advance. Staff also recommends specific review criteria for a rezoning. So things like it should comply with the future land use map and the South District Plan, except where sensitive areas are present or circumstances have changed or information has come to light such that it is in the public interest to change it. So that's similar to a mini comp plan amendment. That's a similar criteria. It would also have to respond appropriately to various site conditions, such as organizing more intense zones around a neighborhood node or a neighborhood feature, for example. It would have to have a transition for neighborhood form-based zones to occur within blocks or across alleys. And then the design of the site should suit the unique topographical, environmental, site layout, and constraints of the site. So it would be similar to laying out any other parcel. Again, the future land use map is how it could look, but it's not how it will look. And that's how that works. So really, it's a standard rezoning with additional criteria. With the preliminary plat, the way that we're approaching that with additional standards related to design sites, thoroughfares, civic spaces, and building types, we would propose that those would be shown on the preliminary plat. So that's kind of the first stage of platting land and creating individual parcels, and then including notation about possible changes. And you would review it against new standards for parcel size, street size, and layout, and block size, which is proposed to be different as part of the zoning code amendment. And then the final plat is where you actually parcel off individual lots. As part of that, we would propose that a neighborhood plan be submitted, which is essentially an updated preliminary plat with additional frontage types to be able to check all of the standards that are within the code. And then as development would occur, you would develop under the zone according to the neighborhood plan. As it's been discussed tonight, administrative changes are possible according to the zoning code text as it's currently provided to you. Specifically, if a lot could contain either one use or another, such as you have a single-family home, but it's big enough for a duplex, then you could swap out those administratively. So building types, frontage types similarly could be swapped if you decided you wanted an engaged porch rather than a projecting porch, or civic space types if you wanted to add a playground or something. As far as design sites go, that's a concept that we had discussed previously, so it's similar to invisible lot lines that you would have in an OPD plan. But you can have multiple design sites on an individual parcel, and a design site would just be essentially an imaginary parcel that has to have a building type on it, a frontage type on it, and meet the standards of the underlying parcel. But those could also potentially be administratively changed. So that brings us to section 2, which is the zones. So this is one that I want to spend some time on too, because I spent some time on it as the comprehensive plan amendment, because you have to understand what those form-based uses mean. But it really, you'll notice that for our future land use map, they correspond with the zones, and it provides more detail there. I already touched on design sites, but there are additional dimensional standards that are within these zones. So it primarily regulates by building type, but it does include things like minimum and maximum lot sizes. There are height limits included in zones, both in stories and in feet. So for example, up to the T4 small, it could be 2.5 stories. Once you get up to the T4 medium and above, it could be 3.5 stories. Parking would also be regulated by the zone rather than our site development standards where they currently are. And it is slightly less than our current standards. I'll talk about that in a minute, what that might look like. There are additional standards related to where parking can be located. When we are talking about parking standards as well, it would lower the minimum allowed. It doesn't mandate that you would provide less parking. And then it also covers allowable frontage types. I already talked about building types. And then there are open subzones that allow a greater variety of uses. So the least dense zone is the T3 neighborhood edge. If you're looking at the general character of it, it's about 2.5, or a maximum of 2.5 stories. So you could have an occupied attic, you could have a walkout basement, but predominantly house scale detached buildings. And then building types could be house, duplex, or cottage court. So it's pretty similar to an RS5, RS8 zone, our typical single family development pattern. When we talk about T3 neighborhood general, that's a step up. So still 2.5 stories, still house scale, detached buildings. But this adds in a couple additional buildings, such as a small multiplex that would be house scale up to 6 units, or 2 to 3 townhouses in a row. So it's somewhat similar to an RS12 or an RM12 in the case of a small multifamily building. It's somewhere in between those two. It's a zone that we don't really have anything like at the moment, unless you use an OPD. The T4 neighborhood small is still 2.5 stories, house scale predominantly detached, but some attached. Building types would be cottage court, the small multiplex, again, a courtyard building which could have up to 16 units, and then a townhouse, and you could have a townhouse row of 4 or 8 units. So it's somewhat similar to an RM20 in that it doesn't allow single family uses or duplex uses. The cottage court is as close as you get to that in that zone. So I would say it's similar to an RM20 in our current zoning. Then you get to the neighborhood medium, which is where you start to get to 3.5 stories. So that's along those major arterials. Still primarily house scale, but you get to some block scale buildings, some detached buildings still. And you get up to larger multiplexes, up to 12 units. The courtyard building small would still be there, up to 16 units in townhomes in rows of 4 to 8 still. So again, it's somewhat similar to RM44, not quite in that the way that the building types are regulated promote smaller blocks of building than our current RM44 standards. And then the T4 Main Street, you can get up to 4 stories, and this is where you're starting to look at block scale buildings. So you're looking at townhouses, which could be stacked. So in a row of 4 to 8, that'd be 12 to 24 units. Courtyard buildings up to 24 units, and then Main Street buildings, which would be as allowed by the building and housing and other codes of the city. So it's somewhat similar to a CN1 zone, a neighborhood commercial zone. It does still require commercial on the first floor, so it's pretty similar to that. And then the open subzones are special subzone designations for the R3 neighborhood general, R3 or T4 neighborhood small, and T4 neighborhood medium zones. It provides some additional flexibility in uses, specifically in that it allows more non-residential uses, as we had previously discussed. And it is shown on the map as neighborhood nodes. So again, just to highlight where those are, the main streets at that intersection or proposed for the intersection of Sycamore and McAllister, and the neighborhood nodes, 4 others scattered throughout. And as it relates to parking, I already talked a bit about the parking facade. Where you see the parking reduction is predominantly in 2-bedroom multifamily units. So instead of requiring 2 spaces under the current zoning standards that we would have in the area, it would allow 4 parking spaces. Otherwise, it doesn't change that much. And then in non-residential uses, that's an even larger change. It's more similar to our peninsula standards, where you restrict the size of the commercial use with the goal of it catering to residents who are in the neighborhood already or others who are driving through. And so in most cases, you wouldn't require or the standards would not require parking if you're less than 1,500 square feet, which is a pretty big departure. And if you get above that is where you have to start providing parking. So it's really in the neighborhood or the non-residential parking uses where you see that biggest effect. For the third section, it's tied to use standards. So again, it allows missing middle housing in all zones. It adds 2 new categories, one for community gardens, one for live-work uses. And then there are some changes based on feedback that we've discussed. So alcohol-oriented sales, in the version in your packet, staff has recommended that that be switched to a special exception that requires project-by-project approval by the Board of Adjustment. And then we also added in limitations on operating hours and open zones for non-residential uses to mitigate positive or negative externalities on the surrounding properties. And again, uses are regulated just secondarily. The fourth section is on site standards. So in some cases, it replaces certain site development standards that we currently have in our zoning code, such as screening, parking lot design, and parking lot landscaping. It does add some new standards as well related to tree diversity requirements, car share and carpool parking requirements. And then it also includes some flexibility for certain standards. So things like design site width and depth, building size, et cetera, could be adjusted administratively given findings by the Director of Neighborhood and Development Services. Most of those findings are related to things like there's some feature in the way where you can't meet the standard, and so it's to provide some flexibility there. And then also some flexibility provided for affordable housing, which I will discuss in section 10. Civic space types is the 5th section. So those are kind of a new concept built into our future land use map. The idea being that it could be public or private open space that's dedicated for public use, primarily to be used as a gathering space of some sort. It could be playgrounds, it could be a plaza. It might be able to contain some commercial uses, for example, if you have abutting commercial properties and would like outdoor seating. But it builds on the open space standards that we currently have in our code. And it regulates by type, so there are both natural and urban typographies. And then the passage I just wanted to point out is a special civic type, which is also a thoroughfare type. So it formalizes pedestrian routes through neighborhoods that would allow larger block sizes. The civic standards also encourage tying stormwater management into amenity space, green fields especially. And then this is incorporated through the neighborhood plan process during final plat. Building type standards is the 6th section. Again, this is kind of a newish concept, but it does exist in the riverfront crossings in some form, but it really distinguishes building form from uses. So if you have a house, for example, you could have a house building that would have a commercial use in it, or a church, or an assisted living facility in a multifamily building. This is more the shape of the building than the use of the building. And one is required for each design sites. Some building types might allow two. But then it also includes new standards that includes minimum and maximum bulk requirements to ensure that buildings stay house scale. It regulates the number of units, but it doesn't regulate by density as our current zones do. And we do require housing diversity on each block, so at least 2 building types. And then carriage houses are also allowed with most building types. And it's incorporated into our revised processes, so it's included on the preliminary plat, it's finalized in that neighborhood plan, and reviewed during building permit or site plan review with the possibility of administrative change if it meets the underlying standards. So we've talked about these a little bit already. There are houses and duplexes. Basically, as you go up from T3 neighborhood edge up to the T4 Main Street, you increase in intensity. So there are different varieties of houses and duplexes. For smaller multifamily and cottage courts, those are when you're starting to get into the mid ranges. The multiplex large, which is that bottom right one, is where you start to only allow that in the T4 neighborhood medium zone. That's where you get into 12-unit multiplexes. And then with the bigger buildings, when you're in T4 neighborhood medium and Main Street, you start to see stacked townhouses. You start to see courtyard building larges with up to 24 units, and then you see Main Street buildings potentially. And then carriage houses are the accessory. So as we're putting this together for individual zones, the T3 neighborhood edge, they all allow carriage houses with certain building types. The T3 neighborhood edge is house large, duplex side by side, and cottage court. That T3 neighborhood general is house small, the 2 kinds of duplexes, cottage court, multiplex small, and townhouse in a row of 2 to 3. When you're in T4 neighborhood medium, still 2.5 stories, you get into cottage court, multiplex small, townhouse in a row of 4 to 8, or courtyard building small. The T4 neighborhood medium is where you start to get into multiplex large, townhouses, and courtyard building smalls, and that's where you can get into 3.5 stories. And then the T4 Main Street is courtyard building large and the Main Street building. Section 7 is the architectural standards. So this works in conjunction with the zone standards and with the building type standards to try and ensure visual interest and attractive pedestrian realm. So it's similar to our multifamily site development standards that affect all multifamily buildings. Many similar requirements, similar bulk requirements. It's got some similar requirements to riverfront crossings, such as splitting up the architecture horizontally and equal treatment of facades and corners. But it doesn't regulate building materials. It doesn't include window and architectural standards, and roof design is not included in this. The 8th section is related to frontage type, which is that interface of the public and private realm. So it's also is a newish concept in that it's in riverfront crossings, but not elsewhere, but it works with other standards to provide visual interest and is required for each design site within the facade zone. It does create some new standards for that, so regulates the size and appearance of the building entrance and requires diversity on each block again, so you have to have at least 2 different frontage types. And then it's incorporated into revised processes, specifically the neighborhood plan, but this also would be allowed to be changed during building permit or site plan review. So frontage types, I'm just going to touch on briefly. There are porches, dooryards, stoops, common things that you would find in residential buildings, but they're not restricted by use again, so you could, for example, have a porch on a commercial building. Forecourts, terraces, as you're getting into higher density zones. And then as you get into the main street zone, you run into frontage types like the gallery or arcade, and then the maker shop front for side streets and the shop front for what you would expect in the commercial area. The ninth section is related to thoroughfare types. So this is a new concept where there are different cross sections of each type shown in the zone. It's built into code requirements for Title 15. And the concepts for the neighborhood streets are similar. It's a slightly wider right-of-way, but the pavement widths are similar. But the goal is to ensure that multimodal access is possible along street fronts. And so new standards include things like regulating street width, lanes, on-street parking. The newest standard is street trees required in the right-of-way. And types can be switched, so you could switch from the future land use maps. You could switch from parking one side to parking both sides, what have you. And then alleys and passages are unique that I want to spend a little bit of time on. And they are, again, incorporated into the revised processes, so the preliminary plat would show them, and they'd be finalized during final plat with the possibility of administrative change, and that includes alleys and passages as well. So alleys and passages. Alleys would be, if you're behind an existing unit, it would provide separate vehicular access. They are, as written in the Title 15 subdivision code currently, or as proposed in that code, they would be required along primary streets, which are specifically McAllister or South Gilbert, unless vehicular access can be provided from other streets. So for example, if your lots are able to get access from side streets, you don't require alleys there. But the goal is that you don't want access directly onto a main street. With passages, they're unique in that they can provide a pedestrian crossing, which can affect the block length standards. So the amount of blocks that you see in the future land use map, for example, could be halved practically if every other street was turned into a passage. But that would be a 20-foot green space with a 10-foot bike path on it, essentially, or pedestrian bike path. And it's also a civic space type, so the idea is that you would front on it, and it would be unique, but you would still have to have some sort of vehicular access. So whether that be from alleys or side streets, it very much depends on the layout of how an applicant would come and propose to meet the standards of the code. So again, this is what the future land use map looks like. The primary streets would pretty much stay the same, so it's the neighborhood streets that could change from this, as this is just one example of how it might develop. And then the 10th section is on affordable housing incentives. So this was a section that we added from the initial version of the draft that you might have seen a year ago. So the idea is that it would provide incentives for voluntary affordable housing, predominantly, with some incentives for other affordable housing. But it must be for on-site affordable housing within a form-based zone. And so it supplements some of our mandatory policies that we have, like for annexation. Half of the area is not yet annexed, and so that would be subject to separate standards that the city already has. This would be for units on top of that, or units if you weren't annexing and you wanted some of these bonuses. So the general requirements are that rental housing would be for households at less than 60% AMI We've talked about this in the past, and I believe a memo was included in your packet on it, which would be limited to fair market rents or possibly LIHTC rents if there was a LIHTC project that would incorporate it. I'd encourage you to review the memos on that if you did not have a chance. For owner housing, it would be for households less than 80% AMI, so that's what is considered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to be affordable housing. And it's limited to the HUD sales price limit plus some certain fees like realtors fees, for example. The affordability period would be 20 years and would be secured by an agreement that ran with the land. So as far as incentives then, a parking reduction could be possible where all affordable housing, whether voluntary or as part of annexation policies, wouldn't necessarily require minimum parking amounts for any of those units. A density bonus for building types that allow 4 or more units, but all of those additional units must be affordable, and that'd be a potential 25 increase to the maximum. Zoning adjustments to one of the following, either design site width, design site depth, or area in the facade zone being modified. And then building type adjustments to one of the following, which could be building height width or building height half-story increase. But the findings must be that the adjustment has to fit the site and neighborhood characteristics and be consistent with the intent and standards of the goals, of the plan goals. And then additional minor adjustments if the housing is restricted to lower income levels, then you might be able to provide an additional zone and additional building type adjustment. There are also other Title 14 changes that are included in the proposed zoning code amendment. So those affect things like the introduction, off-street parking and loading, sign regulations, outdoor lighting standards, sensitive features, general definitions, and sign definitions. Those are mostly incorporating the form-based zones into other code sections that refer specifically to zones, so you have to include them. So for example, outdoor lighting standards, it puts it into similar zones as the RS and RM zones. When you sensitive features, it's similar to the RS and RM standards. But I would encourage you to review those as well. Off-street parking and loading is only related to on-street parking of large commercial vehicles. So in terms of analysis, it's pretty similar to what I've talked about with the comprehensive plan, but the land use planning guides future development to ensure consistency with the characteristics, goals, and objectives of the community. And the current zoning code does provide some flexibility, but has historically led to conventional greenfield development. So as I've stated earlier, low densities create neighborhoods that increase greenhouse gas emissions and reliance on automobiles, and it limits the variety of housing types and possible price points. So adopting a form-based code is consistent with long-term city policy towards advancing social justice, racial equity, and human rights, and the climate action and adaptation. And again, form-based standards aren't a silver bullet, but they are a step towards implementing those goals as we've discussed. And so the consistency with the comprehensive plan is the similar goals that are provided for the comprehensive plan amendment that I discussed. So mix of housing types, pedestrian-oriented development, commercial development in defined commercial nodes, preservation of farm and open space, parks that have visibility and access from streets, and the development of parks with single-loaded street access. And then with goals in the South District Plan, preserving environmental features, small neighborhood commercial uses, safe and logical walking routes to school. And it, of course, aligns with the proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan, as well as other more recent policy efforts that have been discussed already. So staff believes that incorporating these elements into the zoning code is the next step in really addressing some of these items. The proposed amendment also affects Title 15. I just wanted to bring these to your attention again. The Planning and Zoning Commission does not review Title 15 or changes to it, but it works with the proposed zoning code amendment by addressing some housekeeping items, mentioning what items are in a preliminary plat, such as some of the new standards, and in the final plat specifically through the neighborhood plan. And then it does change the design standards and required improvements, specifically for streets and circulation, which requires compliance with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan, and layout of blocks and lots where the block sizes are changed based on what zone you're in, but those block lengths can be increased with the inclusion of a pedestrian passage to make sure that there is still pedestrian circulation that's possible. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ann.
I just wanted to go through the public comments that we received on the draft code. We received some correspondence from Cheryl Cruz stating that the proposed rent limits for the affordable housing incentives are too low and would not incentivize new affordable units. We also heard from Kelsey Patrick Faree, who has concern about safety of children walking and biking to the elementary school. Sandhill Estates HOA has expressed their concerns to the commission tonight, but a couple that relate to the zoning code are design sites being administratively changed. That was a concern, and also a concern regarding the lower minimum parking standards. From the South District Neighborhood Association, they would like to see more wayfinding in the district, especially wayfinding to parks and Main Street areas. They had questions on commercial uses, specifically liquor stores and gas stations, and they would like to see more spaces for local entrepreneurs. Similar to what we discussed with the comprehensive plan amendment in your late correspondence that was presented to the commission, there were concerns related to reducing parking, and then I guess multifamily in the backyard, which is more an issue with the comprehensive plan. So again, the staff is recommending approval of REZ 21-0005, a zoning code amendment to adopt form-based standards for new development in areas of Iowa City as identified in the comprehensive and district plan. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Do members of the commission have questions of staff regarding this consideration of a zoning code amendment?
I just have a question on the affordable housing piece. And I was just concerned that it says that on page 129B, under occupancy, to sum it up, a person gets a unit and when they're eligible, okay? They get a job, their salary goes up. It says here that they can continue to live there till they vacate. So does that mean that they can stay there even though they're now not eligible, and their rent just goes up?
The rent, I believe, stays the same.
The rent would stay the same even though
yes,
every year they're reevaluated?
Yes. I believe that's the administrative plan.
Yeah, the way that it currently works is that, say you're in a multifamily building and the units sort of float. So if someone moves into unit 1 and they are income qualified and later become, earn more money and they're no longer considered income qualified, then at the next leasing period, they could stay in that unit, but then the landlord would have to establish a different unit, basically rent it to an income qualified family. So that unit 1 would no longer be managed as part of the program.
Okay, because it just says that they can stay there till they vacate. And it looks like that if they don't leave, they just pay that same rent. And I'm sure that's not true.
At the end of the lease period, they would be able to negotiate a different price, but then a new unit would have to be designated as affordable.
I have a question for you, Ann. Discussing design review, that already occurs, administrative design review. We've talked about that in this group many times, that changes are made after approval because there's an administrative process. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that we do have some processes that allow for administrative changes. In the Riverfront Crossing District, we have minor adjustments, which are changes that are administratively reviewed. We have minor modifications, which apply citywide, which are administrative reviews of changes.
All right, thank you. I just didn't think that was particularly new, so I just didn't want people to believe that didn't already occur. Other questions for staff by members of the commission?
So a question or a comment was made, and I thought it was a very interesting one. In the Riverfront Crossing District, the landowner can opt in to the code or not. Is that true here?
That is true. There's land that's currently within the planning area that is zoned RS5, RS8, where the landowner could develop under that current zoning. It wouldn't require rezoning to the form-based zones. I guess the difference between this area and the Riverfront Crossings District is that a lot of the area in our planning area, the 900 acres, is not in the city. It's going to need to be annexed and rezoned. Some of it is an interim development zone, which they could, continue to farm the land, but to really develop the land, it needs to be rezoned.
And at that point, they would have to conform to the code.
Correct.
Okay. Another thing that was, a couple of things that were mentioned, like assisted living facilities or churches, or I know one of the things that came up repeatedly in the early phases with the neighborhood comments was like a neighborhood center or, an activity center, a rec center for the area. Mm-hmm. Are those type of uses allowed, are they allowed here, I guess? That's the question, I guess.
I guess the question about assisted living uses are allowed in some of these zones through a special exception process. And community service uses are also allowed. Daycare uses, general community service uses are also allowed.
As our religious private group assembly, a lot of the use standards, as you look through the use table, point to existing standards and zones that were believed to be relevant to these zones in terms of the sorts of standards that the city would want applied. So some are required, or some are allowed by special exception, some provisionally with compliance with the standards, and then some are permitted by right.
Okay. I think that's all my questions.
All right. Any other questions for staff by commission members?
I'd like to say this just seems more like a neighborhood than just a bunch of houses in a community. When you have the different types of houses and the businesses, and just my opinion.
Maria, anything?
I don't have any questions. I really like it. I think it's sustainable and it's have a good vision of the future of like an equitable city. And I'm very concerned because 2 weeks ago the United Nations released the latest climate report, and that's really scary. So I think this is the right way to do things.
Susan, any questions?
I'm good.
All right, let's go ahead and open the public hearing for consideration of the zoning code itself amendment to adopt the form-based standards for new development as identified in the South District Plan.
But do we need a motion before we start?
Well, we're just going to have the public hearing, then when we close the public hearing, then we'll have a motion.
Okay.
All right, Steve?
Thank you. Steve Gordon again. I don't have any prepared comments this time, so I may apologize if I jump around, but Mark, you had some good questions. I want to address those. First off, there are a piece of ground of about 48 acres, and I think another small piece is already zoned. We're RS8 and there's an RS5. So that is correct that we could zone under those zonings, but if we want to do, I guess my question is, hope somebody asks it, if we wanted to do a plan development or had a different idea, is that going to be, are we going to be allowed to do a PUD, a plan development in that area, or any rezoning there has to go to this form-based code? And then all the rest of the land, which is a majority of it, comes in under this code. No options to do anything under the current code, as I kind of alluded to before. You mentioned, I'm certainly clearly aware that this code does not regulate uses, it more regulates form and function. As a person that owned and operated assisted living facilities throughout Iowa, I can assure you that nobody's going to build one that's limited to 16 units or has to be in 2 or 3 different buildings. The care and the staff and what you need to take care of those our vulnerable citizens is not possible in that size of unit. Bickford Cottage, Legacy Point, those are examples of quality assisted living, and they're not 16 units, and they can't be. Churches, it was mentioned, or religious facilities, you know, I don't see in this code, I hope I'm wrong, that like a St. Pat's church could be built. Again, the form and function of that building is too big, the lot's too big. Maybe a smaller facility, but not anything like that. You look at the vintage co-ops that were built, Foster Road and over on the west side, you know, great facilities, house needed in this community. Again, the form and function don't allow it. Affordable housing, there's really two ways to provide affordable housing. One is for a professional developer that's versed in how to get tax credits and other forms of funding. There's a lot of knowledge in that, a lot of costs, a lot of skill involved. You don't typically see those developers wanting to do a small project of 12 units or 8 units or 16 units. They need larger projects to justify what it takes to get that done. The project in Towncrest is a good example for the seniors. Sand companies on Rochester is another good example of structures that would not be allowed under this code but are needed in this community and provide a great service. And let's see, was there something else? I guess that's so again, understanding that the use is not a problem, but what you can do and utilize the land for, or the size and scope of the lots and the buildings are. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else like to address the commission on this amendment? Second call. Seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Could I have a motion to approve the zoning code as, to amend the zoning code as illustrated in attachment 5 and to adopt form-based standards for new development in the areas of Iowa City as identified in comprehensive plan, district plans REZ 21-0005?
I move.
So there's a motion by Padron. Is there a second?
I'll second Townsend.
Second by Townsend. Discussion?
The question about planned unit development, is that a possibility anymore in this code?
If we receive a request for a rezoning in this area, we are going to review it according to the criteria that we've laid out for rezoning in consistency with the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan shows that we are envisioning these form-based zones in this area. So it would probably require a comprehensive plan amendment to move forward with a plan development overlay rezoning.
And to one of Steve's points also, what is is there a maximum number of units a building can have in this code?
There is, based on building type.
And what would that maximum be?
It depends on the zone. The Main Street zone doesn't restrict it, but that would only be in those Main Street areas. I think the other next densest one would be stacked townhouses in neighborhood medium, where you could get up to 24 units, or the courtyard building large, which is only allowed in Main Street. Most of the other smaller ones would be up to 16 units typically in separate buildings.
Mark, you look like you're thinking. Do you have an additional
Well,
question?
you know, I am a huge proponent of the missing middle, because I think it makes for a wonderful neighborhood. My concern is we've got 900 acres here, and we potentially can't have anything over 24 units, so we can't house a vintage co-op or an assisted living facility in this 900 acres, as I'm understanding it, and that. And staff can correct me if that's not right, but that does concern me. I mean, I think that makes for a vibrant neighborhood. I think, recreational facilities and churches and assisted living and senior housing and co-ops and all that makes for a vibrant community and a vibrant neighborhood. And I don't know how, I am concerned about how you can add that vibrancy to 900 acres if the code doesn't allow it.
The code would not allow a vintage co-op. I mean, that is a large block scale building that might be allowed in the Main Street zone with commercial on the bottom, but only probably within that Main Street zone.
And that's very limited spots in the map, very limited.
Can you, like civic uses and those sorts of things, can you go over those standards a little bit again? I'm sorry.
The civic space?
Well, civic uses, right? If they're talking churches or community centers or something like that.
Yeah, so those uses are uses that are allowed, but I think Mr. Gordon's concern is that the building types are not the typical building types that you see for a church. So you could have a church, but it needs to fit within one of these building types. You could have assisted living, but it needs to fit within one of these building types, which is not, I guess, what is commonly seen when we see these assisted living facilities. They are very, very large scale, and I think what this code is trying to do is to allow smaller scale uses, smaller scale buildings, but still the same uses.
But these types of facilities would not be absolutely precluded, would they not? Because somebody could come in with a comprehensive plan amendment.
That is true.
And we've done that multiple times through the years. So I acknowledge that it's not allowed in the code, but doesn't mean it's precluded absolutely.
So it would go back to my comment before that it would require a comprehensive plan amendment.
Or they would need to build it within the proposed building types.
Right. And I mean, I would agree with most affordable housing developers, most senior living developers they can't do it with 16 or 24 units. So we're going to require the need to go through comprehensive plan amendments for anybody who wants to put that on any of these 900 acres. I just want to be clear what we're talking about here.
But historically, I think Mark, you were on the west side with that senior living facility that was withdrawn and built in Coralville subsequently because of neighborhood opposition, and then the Hickory Hills. I mean, they're difficult to place no matter what the public good of them is. I've supported them unreservedly every time they come up in town, but it appears nobody wants them in their neighborhood other than me.
And that's true. I mean, that is the issue. And we're pretty much, I think, putting the nail on the coffin here on that in this situation. And I guess that does concern me a little bit. And again, I mean, I love the idea of having these smaller options where you can have a sixplex on a lot, or you can have a duplex. You can have. I mean, I think that is just, and that's why I've been very supportive of all this throughout. It's just, some of these details I have missed or just haven't come to light. And that's why I'm asking questions, and I appreciate the input that we get. I guess I struggle with that balance of, I don't know if we need 900 acres of duplexes.
And one thing, an observation I would have is, that if this amendment is approved, doesn't mean it can't be amended again. So as this matures and develops and realizes some changes need to be made, there's nothing that precludes those from occurring.
And I said that earlier, and that's a good point. I mean, we like you said, we do it all the time because the needs and wishes of the community change over time, and so that's a very valid point.
And it's not 900 acres of duplexes. I mean, I think that's the beauty of it. It's 900 acres of open space, walkways, both public and private, multiple parks in this neighborhood, a school. I mean, there's a lot, a commercial uses. I mean, I just think this is going to be a vibrant, I mean, if it comes to fruition, the way the vision is, it's going to be a great place to live.
Further discussion? Mark, anything else?
No.
Billy?
I think I've said enough.
Right. Maria?
No, I actually like the idea of if we want a community center or something bigger, that they can apply for an amendment, and then we can review that again, because we're not going to need like 10 churches in that small neighborhood. Especially, I think right now it's more important to keep the human scale and think small, and then we can add things as the neighborhood needs, like one community center or one church. So it makes sense to me.
Susan, anything else?
I'm good.
Okay, so we have a motion by Padron, a second by Townsend. We've had discussion. I'll call rolls. I will not call the vote. All those in favor of approving the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, the motion passes unanimously. So now we go on to item number 7, consideration of meeting minutes from August 5th, 2021.
The minutes.
Is there any major additions or corrections to those minutes? Mr. Sines, you were the man. Any changes?
I just want to say, I think Mr. Sines did an amazing job last week.
Thank you very much. He is the man. So a motion for approval?
So you can't.
I'll do a motion by Townsend and a second by Sines.
There you go, she gets it that time.
You
All right,
led.
motion Townsend, second by Sines. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, it passes unanimously. Number 8, planning and zoning information. Ann?
I don't think I have any updates tonight.
Okay.
Do you think we're going to be in here for the foreseeable future?
Yes. Yeah.
It's not as homey as Emma Harvard Hall.
I'm very cold.
I really just feel completely out of my element, I'll be honest, after all the years there. I just feel like I'm just...
Is no one meeting in that room?
No, it's occupied tonight, yeah.
All right.
And I truly, I mean, I'm about to send an email to Jeff Fruin, I'm, wondering why, after
They took
God
our
knows how
space.
many years we've met on the first and third Tuesday of every month, and someone managed to sneak in there and take it.
Should we all?
I will say part of it was my fault. I thought I had the room reserved, and it was not reserved. So I apologize for that.
But I'll just tell you, here, I just feel like, usually this just wrote for me, and I'm just like, I lost my place.
It's hard to see the board. Usually everything is right there.
Yeah.
And it's hard
Part of
to
it
read
too
from-
is social distancing. I mean, this is a larger space than Harvard Hall, and so that was the idea. We've had a lot of crowd turnout the last couple of meetings, so if we have to be in person,
Yeah.
this is
It is bigger.
our
I'll
best
tell you,
option, at least.
I prefer in person. It just seems just so odd not to be there.
There's a disconnect. I feel disconnected.
I do too. I feel exactly that way.
But I agree. I'd rather be in person and disconnected than not in person.
So
But at some point, we could move back. I mean,
I think it would require us changing our meeting date and moving to Wednesdays.
seriously?
And that was not the.
Oh, how did that poll come out?
I know it doesn't work for Billy,
Okay.
I have another commitment on
but the others, it seemed to be okay.
Okay.
It is what it is.
Okay, next item. We can't discuss it tonight because it's not on the agenda, but Mr. Sines sent an email out. And so I just wanted to see if there's a sense amongst the commission to put this on a future agenda. And Mark, do you just want to express your
You sent it out to
concern?
us?
Well, no.
Oh.
But I
was gonna
touched
say,
on it.
I don't remember getting it.
I touched on, no, I sent it to the chair and to staff. just asking if we could talk about it. And I mentioned it last week at the end of the session also, just my interest, the council's reversal of the Hickory Hill, and some of the specific statements that were made about, their literal versus, literal interpretation of past neighborhood, old neighborhood plans and things like that. And so it makes me wonder, are we using the right criteria in which to judge our decisions if that's not the same criteria that they're using? And
I would like us to add it to the agenda if it's possible at some point, because I came to the commission after you guys talk about it, and I do have some questions about that. So if we could have like a small work session or talk a few minutes about it, because I think, or maybe I can just meet with you, Ann, because I do have questions, and I don't know if that's going to come back or...
I think you're saying two different things, though. I mean, I think Mark is talking about council's perception of what our job is, and are we doing it according to how they think we're doing it, and yours is more like the history of the project.
Oh, no, because I thought he said if we want to add it to the agenda. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because we can't go into an in-depth conversation about this because it's not on the agenda.
Right.
But I just wanted to see if there's a sense amongst the commission of wanting to have some kind of discussion about what Mr. Sines said about, are we analyzing this in the same way the city council wants us to, or how they do? I'll just jump right in. I think we do our job, and our job's is this consistent with the comprehensive plan, or is the zoning ordinances being followed? And certainly on comprehensive plan issues, that is a subjective question many times, whereas zoning ordinances, that's more black and white, that's more objective. But I don't believe our job is to ensure that what we do is then ratified by city council. Because frankly, I don't agree with some of their decisions, and I feel we did our job. Now, in a political nature, they can vote however they want to, yep, whether I think it's right or wrong. Yep. And I think it's wrong.
Right. And I think it's for the attorney to tell us what our job is according to the law, and not the city council.
Yeah.
And I would just like to interject that if it was something that we were doing wrong, the council would have asked us to meet with them to discuss it as they've done before.
Well, I don't think we did anything wrong.
Well,
I'm not. Yeah, I mean, and are we using the same? Are we using the right criteria to make our decisions based on?
I contend we are, and I contend they're using criteria that's extra.
Yes.
Comprehensive. That's all.
Right. I mean, the same staff report is more or less given to them, so they've got the same information, the same criteria. They're just coming to a different conclusion on occasion. And when they sort of informally recognize that they're going to vote differently than you guys, they create the opportunity for the council, Yeah. So there's already that process there to discuss these differences.
Well, I'm not hearing.
But maybe some kind of formal work session training or something like that might be appropriate. But as a agenda item, for discussion, I don't know quite what that looks like.
Because I'd be fine with that, like an informal thing, because it is important sometimes to remind us what our actual role is and how we approach that role, and what should be brought into consideration in that contemplation versus the things that are outside of that. And that whole issue of conditional zoning agreements. So what is in the interest of the public to be added? I think that's a worthy discussion. It'd be a short meeting, I think, just to hear from you folks, just to ratify that issue. Because it's very easy to get caught up in the political piece or in the public pressure piece, and it helps to be affirmed sometimes that that's not necessarily our job.
Right.
And I suspect that's what Maria's kind of referring to some too. And I know when I started, I think everybody who starts, we struggle for a little while and just kind of what,
Yeah.
The public pressure piece is very overwhelming when you're new.
I know.
It's very overwhelming, between Hickory Hills and then tonight. It's very overwhelming for people. And that's why when you have in your mind, our job is to, and then you just follow that job, then you certainly appreciate people's input, but you're not necessarily responding to that. You're hearing them.
But I think what Mike is saying, after we do our job and we send it over to them and they do something totally different, what's the difference?
Politics.
The
difference is politics, and that's okay. They're a political body, and we
Yeah,
are.
but you have to remember that not every council member voted differently than this commission.
Oh, yeah.
So some of them agreed.
But not
so-
every commissioner voted to approve it either. I mean, that's
Right.
okay.
So it's okay.
Yeah, because the one thing I've honestly always felt, and I said this several times, I've never once felt like some commissioner made a vote in bad faith. I've just never have felt that.
Right.
I've been in disagreement with them, but that doesn't mean I ever feel they voted wrongly.
Right, no, I would agree too. Yeah. Okay, I'm not hearing a need to, unless we have a.
No, but I do like the idea of sometime when we have enough agenda items for training for an
Yep.
informal, where we'd add that onto it.
Yeah, and maybe we've talked about that too, maybe being an annual thing or something.
I just think it's helpful.
I like that idea. Yeah. Like
Yeah, we-
sometime shortly after the July change, when new commissioners come on.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good time to revisit that.
All right, and then,
Motion
enough
to adjourn.
discussion?
Uh-oh.
I have a motion to adjourn. We got a motion by Science to adjourn.
second.
We got a second by Townsend. Discussion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, we're adjourned.
I am out of here.
Another